briefings. There's 3 briefings. So there's 2 official briefings and an introduction, and so that we can keep it straight and have the briefings. The suggestion is that we have each briefing before each individual item and have the questions for the briefings at that time, and so we don't do it twice, and so that the information is fresh in our minds. So that basically splitting up the briefings and putting them as an introduction to each item, and moving 7F from F to the beginning of the agenda are the proposed changes. Any discussion? Yeah, I need a mover. So moved by Councillor Holland, second by Councillor Kiley. Any discussion? Okay, so we'll vote on those changes. All those in favor? And that carries. So then we go to the minutes from June 13th. And we need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Kiley, second by Councillor Holland. Any errors or omissions, comments? Seeing none, we'll vote on the minutes. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Spell. It was moved by Councillor Kiley. Yeah. It's okay. Good. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Procedure. So all those in favor of the minutes opposed? That carries. So then we have disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we then have delegations from the public. Seeing none, none have submitted to delegate. Of course, the public will have a chance to speak to the items. Okay, so then the briefings are being moved to each in front of each item, and so we go to business 7A, 7F, which has been moved to the front. So if you go to page 4 of the agenda, Rideau Crest Home Board of Management, we need a mover and a seconder to resolve into the Board of Management. Moved by Councillor Holland, second by Councillor Kiley. All those in favor? That carries. So we are now the Board of Management, and we have the information report, May to June 2019. And we'll have an introduction from the representative from Rideau Crest. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Christina Tarunin. I'm the Director of Care at Rideau Crest Home. I'm stepping in for our administrator who's currently on vacation this week, Casey Keys. Okay, so for the report, this covers the months of May and June of 2019. So the home maintained an overall occupancy rate of 98.96% from the months of January to June of this year, which has been steady thus far for the year. During that time of May and June, the home had 4 incidents and 1 complaint that was reported to the Ministry of Health. And they are typical reports that we find that fluctuate from month to month. The Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care were not in the home during the months of May and June. As of June, the wait list for the home sits at 458 people. 278 of those people are waiting in what's called a 4A priority, who are actively seeking or requiring admission into a long-term care setting. And 30 of those people have been identified or delegated as crisis placement, which is a little higher than previous times. During that time of May and June, there were no outbreaks declared by public health, and no other regulatory bodies visited the home at that time. By the end of June, Rideau Crest Home had spent 46.48%, excluding commitments, of the municipal contribution, which is approximately $203,000 under budget. There were some funding announcements at that time, and they've been communicated to all the long-term care homes. Due to the timing of the changes, the home has not seen a significant impact for this year's commitments. The annualized impact for funding will be a revenue decrease for the next following year. So some of the changes that are effective for April 2019 onward, the new global adjustment funding of $1.77 per resident per day, or $110,000 per annually, is effective April 1st. There was RN funding that the home had been notified of last year that we would be receiving. That has actually changed. It is the same amount of $106,000 annually, but there's no requirement to add additional staff. That funding can be used with existing staff for direct care envelope services. As of August 2019, some changes include the funded CMI. There was a decrease from 0.9821 to 0.9524. And that is the budgeted rate effective March 2020. There was the estimated budget of 0.9492, so that does fall within the approved budget, and there are plans in place to further investigate and improve the CMI for years ahead. Also to note, there was a high wage transition funding of $36,000 and structural compliance program funding of $186,000 that are going to be eliminated effective August of 2019 currently. And the home is currently working on its budgets and is taking that into consideration. Budgets obviously haven't been finalized, but they have those numbers and they're working with that. And there was no inflationary increases that have been applied to the funding envelopes for 2019. So the budget includes an assumption of 1% inflation. That's an overview.
Thank you. We have the report. It's an information report. Questions from members of the committee are in order. Councillor Holland.
Thank you. I'm curious about the scheduling changes in the scheduling working group, just mostly whether we will hear back in a future report on how things are going.
Yeah, so that project is well underway. Like the report references, there is a committee and we are meeting regularly. Management and frontline staff are both included in that, and we're tallying feedback as well as statistics that we collect within the home, so it's a very objective process. And then the trial was initially planned for a 1-year time period, and then after that we'll evaluate all the data, all the feedback, and then we can report back. Yeah.
Any other questions? I had a question of clarity about the new RN funding change to direct care staff funding. So this was an amount that was used to hire new RN staff. And so the question is, will this envelope then go in the future? Will it be used for RN funding or for any kind of staff funding?
So originally when it was announced last year with a 2-year implementation period, it was designated for RN staffing, additional surplus to what currently is in the home. Since this update's been provided, it does expand it to all nursing. So currently the home is looking at frontline staff, meaning PSW, personal support workers, and taking that into consideration for planning.
So is it fair to say that essentially, if you're an RN at the home, you would consider this a shift towards using non-registered staff, frontline staff? That staffing level is being supported in the RN staffing level as well?
It could be, yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Hurdle?
Thank you. And maybe to add, we do have a number of hours that we need to meet under a collective agreement for ONA schedules. So those are not going to change. We are going to continue to try to achieve those. Recruitment and retention has been challenging. So regardless of this funding, we do have that obligation that we will continue to maintain. I think this was additional funding that was introduced, and we know that our PSW levels are probably a little bit lower than where we would like them to be because they are literally frontline to residents.
Councillor Chappelle.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Kiley and I had an opportunity to tour Rita Crest and was quite impressed with the establishment. And at that time, they were undergoing some renovations, and they were having an issue with some flooring, and I was wondering if there was any update on that. You may not be the right person to ask on this, and I fully understand that, but they were looking at changing suppliers, and they were going through the process, and this would have been about 2 months ago, and I was just curious to see if that was resolved.
That's right. So they have been working with the vendor that was chosen, and they had done a small test area with some recommended improvements. And my understanding is that they're coming back to the home to look to see if those are what the quality of work that's expected, and if not, then they'll be looking at other options.
Any other questions? So we go to members of the public who may have questions about this report or comments. Each member of the public has 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Frank Dixon, President of Kingston. Thank you to staff for the report and the presentation on the question answers. And I've got 3 questions that are all interconnected. Hearing the number on the waiting list for RedoCrest at 458, along with a significant number of those being on a high priority basis. So my first question is, what is the capacity of RedoCrest? Second question, has the city and RedoCrest actually discussed the possibility of expansion or creating a new center for the same sector that they are currently handling at RedoCrest? And number 3 is, how would that possibility be examined through a structural discussion?
Okay, so I speak to the
Hang on a
first.
sec.
Sorry.
Any other members of the public wish to speak? No. Okay, before you answer, the information that's in the report is what we're discussing today. So anything outside of the report, it's not, you don't need to go into conjecture or anything like that. If you don't have any information, you can just say so.
No, that's fine. All I wanted was that currently we have 170 residents in the home. I can't speak to anything else this evening.
Mr. Chair, if I may, maybe
Go
just, thank you. There, a number of years ago, there were conversations about redesigning RedoCrest at that time. There was a decision made to not continue to pursue this. There were other matters that we needed to address, such as the care within the home first. I just want to flag for the committee that long-term care has been one of the services identified by the province that will be reviewed and looked at as part of the health services review that's going to be undertaken over the next couple of years. So we anticipate that there will be some changes to the way that long-term care is currently delivered. I don't think it would be a prudent time to think about expansion without knowing what the province may have in mind for the future.
Thank you. And just to remind members of the committee that this city-run facility is not the only long-term care in Kingston, and all long-term care facilities in Kingston have waiting lists. This is because of the structural, systemic undercapacity issue that the whole province is facing. So we've heard about this before. I just wanted to remind the new members. Anyway, any other? There's no one else left to speak, I guess. So, and it's an information report, so there's no recommendation. Yeah. So that's it for the report. Thank you very much. We now need a motion to rise from the Board of Management. Moved by Councillor Chappell, second by Councillor Holland. All those in favor? And that carries. So we're back to being the Administrative Policies Committee, and we're going to the top of the agenda. Yeah, because it was deferred.
So A was deferred, but B is a supplemental report.
Right.
Which catches.
Right. So to remind the committee, so items A and B are related. Item A was deferred by the committee at our previous meeting. So it comes first because it was deferred. That's the rule of procedure. But item B is the new information about the subject matter from item A. And so staff is going to give us a briefing on item B, essentially, which is the new report, the supplemental report on the policy on council staff relations. And then we'll deal with the 2 items separately, or? Yeah, that's right. So So essentially, item B encapsulates item A. The recommendation from A is part of the recommendation from B. So we're just going to deal with the recommendation from B, because logically, the outcome of that will tell us what to do with the original recommendation that was deferred. So with that procedural note, we will go to staff for the introduction and briefing on this supplementary report. Who's going? Sorry, it's not a briefing, it's an introduction to the item. So further to what I've said, staff can now tell us about this new report, 19-018.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're once again very pleased to be here. We were here in April to present the report on the same matter, and there was a deferral that was brought forward in order to get some additional information. So we're here to provide that additional information. The report itself is pretty self-explanatory. As part of the recommendation, we're looking at the initial report to be received with no action being taken, and then action being taken in the supplemental report, which is before you. So the purpose of the supplemental report is to provide council with a recommended policy with respect to the relationship between members of council and staff as required under the Municipal Act. The City of Kingston was well ahead of the curve on this particular matter and currently has a number of existing policies and policy documents that address the working relationship between staff and members of council. So the applicable sections of these documents have been used to form the basis for the proposed policy which you have before you. The policy serves to identify specific relationship principles based on common messages that are intended to be equally applicable to both members of council and members of staff. The principles of the proposed policy are twofold. Number one, understanding the importance of and the difference between the political representative role of the administrative and operational management role necessary for the provision of efficient, responsible, transparent, and accountable municipal government. And secondly, the need for mutual trust and respect between both parties for the effective execution of their respective duties and functions. The intent of the policy is to ensure that the relationship between members of council and staff is cooperative and supportive with a clear understanding of their respective roles and responsibilities. The city promotes a respectful, tolerant, harassment-free relationship, as well as a good workplace between members of council and city staff. So I'll leave you with paraphrasing of former Deputy Minister Michael Fenn. It is important for elected officials and municipal staff to view the relationship as a working partnership. Although both parties are not always going to agree on everything, each partner is absolutely essential to the other. The proposed policy is a reflection of this statement and the existing bylaws and policy documents that we have before us. We're pleased to answer any questions that committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. To questions only from members of the committee. After committee members have a chance, we'll ask ex officio council members and then members of the public. So, members of the committee, Councillor Holland.
Thank you. Two questions. The first is whether, what training is currently offered to staff and council that would be relevant to the workplace issues that are outlined through this policy? And secondly, do you think that there's any further training that would be required to facilitate this policy?
Through Mr. Chair, we provide training through a number of different opportunities, whether it be e-learning or set-down sessions as well. We are looking forward to providing additional training with respect to this particular policy, given that it is a mandatory policy by the province. Thank you.
So, sorry, just to follow up then, the training that currently exists, the training that currently exists on the portal, is that mandatory?
Yes, it is e-learning, and we also sign off on the particular policies that have formed the basis with respect to this policy as well.
Mr. Vice Chair, will you take the chair so I can ask a question?
I do. Vice Chair.
I'm not sure I heard to ask questions, but just in case. Just as a for instance, so guiding principles 3.2.3 on page 35 of the package, or page 5 of report 018, H. Members, this is talking about guiding principles for city staff. Members is the members of council or committees, and city staff is city staff. So members shall not permit city staff to be subjected to derogatory comments and or behavioral conduct on the part of members of the public or individuals conducting business with the city of Kingston. In a hypothetical, if such a thing should occur, what would be the obligation of members of council or of committees?
Thank you for that question. A complaint protocol associated with respect to this particular policy, and that is the avenue for which any complaints per se, should they come based on this clause, would be dealt with. So
can a member initiate a complaint on behalf of a member of the public regarding city staff, or is it that a member of the public has to go into the complaint process?
if there was a complaint from a member of public to a member of council, that would fall under the code of conduct protocol. For this one here,
Yeah, no, I guess maybe this is the wrong section, but no, I understand the code of conduct is a separate thing, but the question I had is this policy per se, does it introduce a new type of complaint procedure related to actions by city staff and complaint by public?
no, through you, Mr. Chair, I think what this policy does, it formalizes an unofficial practice that we had in the past. So the province mandating that such a policy be put in place will allow us to formalize that type of action.
I guess, okay, my other question is just, it's a clarification really. So the original report and this report, the supplementary, were not written by the same staff, not led by the same staff member. The report is a human resources type of framework for behavior and interaction of employees, and the question is, do the changes we see between the two versions have anything to do with the background of the different lead staff members on the report?
Through Mr. Chair, the short answer is no. We drafted both reports. And the second report was drafted in the sense of toning down some of the information that was in there, as well as the inclusion of the complaint protocol. Those are really the only changes that were done between the initial policy and then the supplemental policy that's attached to the report.
One more question. In the introductory statement of the supplementary report, no, I can't find it right now. Hang on. It says there was comments after, so this is just more of a chronology. So the last iteration in the interim, basically I'm asking for a summary of the input from members of council following the last presentation that would have informed the changes in this report. What types of input was received from members of council?
Through Mr. Chair, the comments were minor. Some were more editorial in terms of toning down from Michelle to May, but the main crux of this was with respect to the complaint protocol section, which was not in the initial document, but is in the subsequent document.
Okay, that's it for my questions.
I return it.
Thank you. Any other members have questions this supplementary report? Or yes, Councillor Schmidt.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just leading on, I have a couple of questions and comments. First of all, I do see this as a very comprehensive effort to bring it together. It's much tighter than the initial document. And one of the comments that I'm really pleased that was removed from the initial document, and this is a question, under the section roles of section 3.21-II role of council, item number under it was page 33, and the comment was to only give direction to city staff through resolution by council as a whole. Now, why was that one removed? And that was one that really flagged and bothered me, but I'd like to know why that was removed.
It's more with the idea that, once again, through you, Mr. Chair, no individual member of council can direct any individual staff person to do a particular task. However, that doesn't prevent the member of council from bringing something to staff's attention that needs to be addressed more from a holistic approach as opposed to a direction, which would just be a district potential item. So one of the reasons that was eliminated is because we're looking to bring something forward in the future that will allow for these type of suggested improvements to come forward, not fully through council, but in a different manner.
Oh, thank you. Further, section F, to refrain from engaging in matters pertaining to the administrative and managerial role of day-to-day operations of the municipality. Can you just offer some clarity? The word choice refrain kind of gives me like an antenna that went up, and I just wanted to get some perspective.
Sorry, before you answer, I've lost my place. Which item are we at there in the policy?
It's under the role, and it'd be listed under page 65. And it'd be section F on the top of the page.
No, I got no answer. We must have different numbering. F here? No, that's where it was before. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it's under 3.2 II, role of council, over the page, letter F. Thank you.
That is correct. So my question was basically the word choice of the word refrain from engaging in matters pertaining to administrative or managerial role in day-to-day operations of the municipality. I'm just wondering if you could offer some insight onto that line.
Through that, it's quite simple, the delineation state.
As an EC, elaborate on that, please.
I think the reality is that when you take a look at the policy holistically, there are various roles that members of council play versus the role that staff play, and it's important that we each understand what our roles are so that both items don't come together at the same time.
I also have a question under .22, working relationship, under section B. And this is discuss issues with appropriate members of staff and whenever possible, advise staff of questions prior to meetings of council or council committees. My concern on this particular issue is I've had an issue where I asked a question of a staff member during a council meeting, which I thought would have been a very reasonable question to ask, and received an email during the council meeting basically telling me that they did not appreciate me asking the question. And I'm concerned that this type of wording in this document would then lead to a grievance possibility by asking said question, and I want to be assured that that is not the intent of this, but that maybe some clarification would be helpful.
Mr. Chair, this does not negatively impact on the opportunity to work collaboratively with staff and council. So we assure you of that.
I have two more questions, being the second last one. Under page 66, this is related to what is expected of city members of city staff. I wasn't sure why Section F was included. And this is through the chief administrative officer or commissions as appropriate, convey feedback to members of council of existing policies, which is fine. But then it says, or other workload demands and related issues. To me, this seems like we're getting into HR, and I'm wondering why that is included in this.
Mr. Chair, I don't share that same vision as you, Councillor, with respect to that. I think the information that's put together in such a way, as you say, is initially to work through the CAO and the commissioners, and then work their way through the appropriate staff to ensure that we provide you with the necessary information that you need. So I don't think I agree with that statement.
I interject for a second. So where you're reading from the initial report, 19-008, and that clause that you just read is identical in the new, so it's unchanged, therefore the answers are valid, but that's not the case about all of report 19-008. And it's just confusing because there's two reports. So for following along, in the case where the clauses are the same, that's great. But if they're not, I guess it's going to get really confusing. I just wanted to point that out.
Certainly, Chair. I don't disagree. I actually found it because the two reports were online, and until I saw a paper version, it really helped facilitate my understanding of this today. I suppose I think there's a lot that's in here. I do believe that this is something that I'd like to review. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to go back and review all the codes of conduct and other things that we reviewed. And I was hoping to have more time to see where the consistencies are and the transference of like the code of conduct and make sure there's no conflicts. And then I'm putting myself in double jeopardy, because the last thing I want to do is support a document that hamstrings the duly elected responsibilities of council. And I think this is a very significant document that impacts the way we function. And my question is this not something that'll be better presented as a group discussion on committee of the whole? And I'm sorry, that could either be for you, the clerk, or the chair.
I think that's a question for the clerk. We're still in question and not in deliberations, but if there was a motion by committee to defer this to committee of the whole, would that be in order? I guess that's the question.
So the exhibit attached to policy 19-018 will be provided to council as part of the agenda package. If it was the intention of council to resolve into committee of the whole during the council meeting, they're entitled to do that as per the procedural bylaw. And as well, all of council will be receiving the policy, as I previously mentioned, in the package with the agenda. So there'll be an opportunity for the information to be circulated.
So council open to committee of the whole, but we can't defer because it hasn't been resolved by council to do so. Is that correct? We could pass a motion. Okay, so procedurally we could pass that motion today, but we're not there. We're at questions. Any other questions? Yes, Mr.
Mr. Chair, one provide for Councillor Chappelle, since he'd like to see the delineation between the first report and the second report, is that opportunity to meet with us to review that, knowing that the recommendation to adopt this particular policy will be going to council in September, so there's ample time for us to sit down with the councillor to try to address his concerns. At that point, if his concerns aren't addressed, council can do whatever it needs to do in order to make sure that the policy is properly implemented, whether it be deferred or not.
Any other questions? Councillor Kiley.
Chair, through you, taking a step back to the macro perspective of this being a mandated policy from the provincial government, how does our policy compare to other municipalities? Are there any major variations?
Through Mr. Chair, we did do a review of other municipalities on where they were with respect to this particular policies, and they're pretty much in line with how other municipalities are dealing with the council staff relations. I mean, we're all trying to do pretty much the same thing when it comes to ensuring that it's a collaborative, respectful type of relationship so that we can conduct the business of the corporation properly. The one point I also wanted to make is that when you take a look at the other documents that were referred to in the report, this report and policy is a collaboration of those particular documents. So there isn't really anything new, but what there is now a formalization of all those principles into one overarching document.
So to paraphrase what the city clerk just said, this is putting in writing processes and conventions that we already have for relations and not changing the relations in any significant way?
That's correct. What I indicated at one point, there was some of the informal practices, but there also are the same type of informations within the codes of conduct and various policies that we have going forward. So this is really an overarching document that brings all those into one.
Councillor Chappelle.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The one question I have is with regards to the notice of concern complaint. Does the, obviously the person who has a concern writes the complaint, but is there full disclosure of the complaint to the person that they're concerned with, or is this, like, how does this get addressed?
Through Mr. Chair, that's all part of the process in terms of filling out the information and having that informal meeting first, and if that's not successful, then it becomes formalized. So information, like anything else, is releasable.
When you say releasable, is that to the public?
No, to each other. This goes more into an HR type of matter, right? It's information that's not going to be released to the public.
Councillor Hutchison, and now that committee members have finished, do you have any questions about this report? Okay. Members of the public have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments about both reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to start by thanking staff for the work. I think it's important and for the most part well done. I did have a question on the timing of the appearance of the second report. I was looking online on Tuesday, and I didn't see the second report there at that time. I saw the first report along with the sort of an attachment of background from the former civil servant. So this is new to me at this point. It just arrived. So my questions aren't really something that can be answered, I think, right now. I think it's a deeper examination needed. So I'm going to start now, and I think I'll follow up with a letter to the committee on the record with the questions. It's more than 5 minutes to get at it. Some of it is following along on what the chair was asking and also members of the committee are asking in this session. So there's been reference made to provincial guidelines on how this topic is applicable and how it is used and the revisions and so forth. So I'm going to go up one level politically to the federal side. And a situation of that could possibly occur. The Criminal Code of Canada has a provision on the requirements of a government to report allegations of wrongdoing. Okay, I've examined this and I've discussed it with lawyers. How does this policy connect with that? Which one has the priority? For example, if there's an allegation made either directly to a staff member about misconduct by another staff member, or an allegation given to a counselor discussing misconduct by a staff member. You can see that there would be issues of hierarchical interrelationships there as well, right? So, for example, someone is someone else's boss, and the information is about, say, someone who is either in that connection or somewhere outside. So, you can see where I'm going. It's challenging. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think I'll follow up with an email coming. And I guess what I would like to have now is an explanation on why the second report is so late in arriving, given that you had it deferred from April, right? This wasn't here for examination by the public until now, and that it has the meat of the issue in it. So I'd like an answer to that now, and the other one I think I'm going to put it on the table, and I'll follow up later. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak? Staff has an opportunity to...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor McLaren?
I could answer one of those questions. Part of the reason it was late was because I was delaying too long and during break.
Oh, Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To address Mr. Dixon's comment, both reports were posted within the timelines for getting the agenda for this particular meeting, so I can confirm that the agenda was posted on Friday and had both reports within the agenda online and distributed for anybody who came in to pick it up. So it just didn't appear today. It was last week, like all the other agendas for this week's meetings.
Okay, so now we go to the business items. So we have, item 7A, the recommendation, that's the old recommendation, and it's contained within the recommendation for 7B. So we're going to deal with 7B, and depending on the result, we may or may not have to do anything with 7A. So 7B comes first, logically, and the recommendation is that no action be taken with respect to report 19-008, which was the first one in this package, and the one that was presented in April. The second clause is that the Administrative Policies Committee recommend to Council that policy Exhibit A to 19-018, so the second set of policies, be approved as presented. They're equivalent policies, so the old one, no action, and the new one, be approved. That's the recommendation. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Holland. So now we're in discussion, debate on the recommendation to essentially approve the new policy. Does anyone wish to speak? Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, you, Mr. Chair. I just want some clarification. So this is still talking about the relationship with AP 19008, correct?
For clarification, in the first clause of the recommendation regarding business item B, it indicates that the report, which was presented as 008, that no action be taken. So if the recommendation is approved as presented in the recommendation for B, the policy which is attached to report AP-19-008 will be approved as presented, and no action will be taken on the previous policy, which was presented 2 meetings ago.
So it's essentially what I was trying to say when I was reading the recommendation, that the policy, if approved verbatim, the policy will be the one that's new to us at this meeting, which is 018, and 008 will have no action. 018 will essentially replace 008.
For further clarification, it's standard practice to place a deferred item as the first item of business on the agenda. And we're unable as staff to remove a report should new information come forward because the initial report, which was deferred, remains in the custody of the committee. So based on the fact that there's new information, it made sense to deal with item B first. If the committee approves that recommendation, then the original report, as per the first clause of the recommendation, no longer has any standing.
Now, also, as chair, I could state that the committee could choose to deal with the original recommendation separately and choose to not approve the first recommendation, 7A, as a formality. It would have no bearing on the recommendation in 7B, but the recommendation in 7B makes that action redundant. But if we wanted to go that extra step, we could also do that.
I actually would like that clarity, so it's very crisp that the first report that came through is have an opportunity to vote on it in its entirety to either reject it or accept it, and then do the second one if we can.
So I would need consent of the committee to consider, to separate and consider recommendation from 7A first, as opposed to what I introduced, which was 7B. I know it's the same. This does. I know, it's a formality. So I need consent of the committee to go back and deal with 7A separately. So I need a show of hands. All those in favor? Opposed? And it carries 3-1. So we will deal with the recommendation 7A. So I need a mover and a seconder for 7A, and that is that the report from 19008, the original report from April, that council approve. That would be our committee's recommendation. We will. So, Councillor Chappelle, would you like to move it to get it on the floor? Does anyone want to second it? This is a procedural formality. We just have to deal with this somehow. Okay. I will second it to get it on the floor, and then we'll go to Mr. Clerk, who wants to make a comment.
I'll withdraw that. Being that it has been seconded, then it is on the floor. My comment was without a seconder, we would revert back to 7B and deal with it in that form.
Okay, we're having a good educational work. So it's on the floor. 7A, the recommendation is that the Administrative Policies Committee recommend to Council that Council approve the original report 008.
If it says it technically has to go to council, so the motion should be that no action be taken on the report in 008.
Right. The clerk is reminding me why we have the wording in the second recommendation. That procedurally, if we vote down a motion or recommendation, it still goes to council in the negative. If we approve the second recommendation first, it contains the language that no action be taken on the first report, and that's what goes to council, that recommendation.
I'll withdraw that motion and we'll go back and deal with the other way. I just wanted to demonstrate that I did not, through consultation with some other councillors, I did not support the first recommended proposal that came out on the 11th. But as the clerk has dutifully demonstrated to me that it'll address what I wanted to do, so I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. There is one other, the two clauses of 7B, if people wanted to vote on them separately, if they were split on their merits. Like, for example, if you wanted to support the original recommendation, you could vote negatively on the first clause. But I'm not suggesting that you should do that. I'm just saying these are the options on the table. Okay, so the motion to separate 7A and vote on it first has been withdrawn. So we're back to 7B, the original recommendation, which has two clauses. It's very repetitive, but the first one is to take no action on the first report, and the second clause is that we recommend approval of the policy contained in Exhibit A of the second report. So, has that been moved and seconded? Yeah, so that's already been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the two clauses of the second recommendation? Okay. Mr. Vice Chair, I would like to comment.
So, Mr. Chair, I recognize you and take the chair.
Okay. I found reports strangely puzzling. I couldn't figure out if this is, okay, we know that the province passed a bill which stated that every municipality has a mandatory requirement to have such a policy. So we are ticking that box, and we're forced to tick that box one way or the other. My understanding is it's not time sensitive in the sense that we have, this term of council has to do it. So thus it's in administrative policies, and thus we can take our time with it if we want to. However, my main concern when I was reading it is this is something that affects the way I do my job, affects my interaction with staff, because it formalizes things that may or may not change over time and may or may not be necessary to formalize. I guess you could use a very poor metaphor, but you've got people that are married and people that are common law, and they may have the identical relationship, that they're partners, but one is a formalized marriage and one is not. To me, this is like making a commitment to a policy on staff council relations. However, the policy was written by staff. So it would be like a marriage or a prenup that was written by one side and not by both. So with that knowledge, our job as the committee is actually to advocate for the best practices that would allow councillors to do their jobs as we know them. And if we see that there's a problem with staff relations, council could easily, there's many ways we could address that through council motions. That's not what's happening here. This is a staff report recommending a framework, and we may well see no reason to oppose it, but it was written by staff and with very little input from councillors. So that's the problem. And the reason that it's a problem is that half of the councillors are not here today, and may be surprised to see this and to be put on the spot to deal with it. And so the suggestion that we might go to committee of the whole and have a fulsome discussion, or then we might want to talk to each other a little bit more before we approve it, those are valid suggestions. So I have talked to a couple of my colleagues about this, but I don't feel like I've had good discussions with everyone. So how do we make that happen? I would hope if we set the ball rolling and we approve it today, we're forced to have those discussions before it comes in September. And that brings up the pragmatic problem of it being the middle of the summer, and it is more difficult to reach all of our colleagues as timely, perhaps, as we might at other times, especially those of us who have children home from school. And it's where I'm thinking, it's too bad this came up in August. So I was thinking, too bad we didn't have this at a time when we could, where we would have, I guess what I'm saying is I think we should defer it to our next meeting so that we can be sure that we have time to discuss it with all our colleagues before we approve it. That's my suggestion. I haven't moved deferral, but maybe I will leave it at that and see if anyone on the committee has a similar sentiment, and then if they wanted to move deferral, I would second it. Thank you.
As you return the chair to you.
You, and I recognize Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. So when this first came out, I actually met with, at the time, ex-Commissioner Gary Dyke, who started to make some changes on this. And since then, we met again with Acting CEO Hurdle and a few others, and a lot of changes were made. I mean, minor ones and big ones. Entire sections were added. And the final meeting that I did have with the clerk and the deputy clerk and who else was there? Some other people were there. Finally did solve a lot of the extra issues that were there. I know that Rob Hutchison and I took advantage of the opportunity to meet with staff when they asked us. They did circulate it around. I'm quite satisfied with the changes they've made at this point. Thank you.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo Councillor McLaren's comments regarding our ability to participate in forming this policy. I think we had that ability. And also just in regards to the fact that it is essentially written by staff. I mean, the reality is the role of councillor is not determined by us, but by the Municipal Act. And this is following along with requirements of the Municipal Act. So I support the work that has been done and would support the recommendation as is.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, thank you through your chair. I suppose what I'll just step back and look at this from a macro perspective. And I do understand that there's been direction from the government to, and I might add, it was the previous government, to have this type of policy in place that brings some sort of structure and framework to relations, because perhaps there were some other municipalities that had very toxic relationships with their staff and councillors, and it does happen. My concern is I'd like to really have an opportunity to discuss with my colleagues beyond our group here, an opportunity to make sure that we are effectively drafting a policy that augments and supports us in doing our job rather than hindering us from doing our job. And I would be more inclined to take more time to ensure that the councillors' perspectives are duly noted, maybe having, circulate amongst our councillors and sign off before it gets to the next meeting. But the problem is we get these council, with only July and August each having one event for council meetings, our agendas are 400 to 600 pages. And this upcoming agenda, I mean, if you want to bore yourself to death, look at the input fee proposal. Like it's torture. So we are deemed to be part-time people managing a $348 million corporation. Yet I don't want to be a rubber stamper, and I want to make sure that whatever I support facilitates the dutifully elected responsibilities I have as an advocate and responsive person to those who duly elected me. And I have that responsibility. And so for that reason, I think the timing of this and the comprehensive nature of this has been great. My accolades go to staff, but I would just like to have more time. And I would move to defer to the next Administrative Policies Committee so that we can have an opportunity to discuss with our colleagues, whether it's in a group form or with so that we're not in quorum, but so that we do have a comprehensive discussion. Thank you.
This motion to defer to the next council meeting to be able to confer with colleagues. Is that essentially it? Okay. All right. Do we have a seconder? I will second. So discussion is to whether or not the next meeting is appropriate, which is time, and whether or not administrative policies is the right place, which is place, and that's it. Okay?
Yeah, thanks. So this would be to place then. I'm curious about, I think bringing it back to this committee is not going to resolve the issue of not having, a meeting that's dedicated with where there would be quorum issues if we did get together as a group, unless it's a committee of the whole meeting. So I'm curious about how we're going to facilitate the request, Councillor Chappelle's request, through the bringing it back to admin policies.
Do you have a suggestion other than administrative policies? That's the purpose of the debate. I can't just see. My ruling on that comment is that it is out of order, as it is arguing against the deferral. Any other comments to time or place?
It's a
Councillor
question.
Holland.
This is a question for the clerk regarding place. Does the deferral have to come back to this committee, or can it, where else would it go?
Mr. Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Chair, any recommendation come from this committee is going to go to council. Either you can defer it, refer it back to Administrative Policies Committee, but take a look at what Councillor Holland said about what may or may not be accomplished, but you can't refer it elsewhere, because this recommendation, whatever it may be, will go to council for their consideration.
So they cannot resolve, this committee cannot resolve council into committee of the whole, so that's not an option. Therefore, what the clerk is saying is that there are no comments in place. So only comments on time are in order, which would be next, if you want to argue for a time other than the next meeting. But if you want to argue against the deferral, I will cut you off. Councillor Kiley.
A point of order. If we were to recommend or not recommend to council, when it comes before council, are we able to make amendments to the policy at that time?
Through Chair, yeah, any issue coming from a standing committee or citizen committee to council is amendable, yes.
Okay, so it's motion to defer for one meeting. I will call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that fails. We go back to deliberation on the motion. Any other comments? Councillor Kiley.
Continue your marital metaphor. I do.
I think the committee wants to vote on this now. So I will call the question on the recommendation. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that carries 3-2. Next. Yes, this is item C, closed meetings, key procedural elements. There's a report from Director of Legal Services, and the acting director is here, and he can introduce the report. Go ahead, Mr. McLeod.
To the chair, the purpose of the report, this is a continuation report that was before this committee on April 19th. What's proposed are two processes. One is the process for deliberating and voting upon matters in closed session, and then transitioning that out to open session. The second is related to the process for requests for the disclosure of records after the fact related to closed session. These recommendations tie into the original motion of council, 7 August of 2018, as recommendation or question 1C and question 4. Other, as it says in the report, other issues will be addressed in a further report coming. So the point here is that these are the only two topics before the committee today. In the report, as it relates to deliberations and the process for transitioning out, At page 10, I won't go through it at this time unless the committee wishes me to. From page 10 and 11, there's a 7-step process, 7 principles that's set out. Prior to that, there's a fairly lengthy discussion of 4 principles or constraints that are sort of embedded in the process. So the idea is to create a simple process that will allow, in any context, a proper discussion by council in closed session and a proper transition into open session. The other issue is the question of disclosure of records, and the recommendation is that the committee recommend to council that we follow the rules that are set out in MFIPA already. It's actually quite unique that under MFIPA, which is usually a set of general rules, there is a very specific process for making requests related to closed session records. Those records include the notices and agendas, the minutes, and the reports that are submitted. So because there's a comprehensive process already set in a statute, it's our recommendation, or my recommendation, that that be followed. And I have in the report set out some more detail about that, and I'd be certainly happy to answer any questions related to that as well. So subject to your questions, that's my introduction.
So we have the report, and at this point, it's members of the committee that have the opportunity to ask questions. Councillor McLaren.
Thinking at section C of the closed session procedures, you're describing when this would take effect. And I'm not entirely clear that this would have taken effect had we had this in place during the Cat West lands issue that came to council.
Through the chair, if I could, unfortunately, one of the really problematic constraints on the discussion is that we cannot talk about matters that are in closed session in this committee openly.
So
and
I believe that
I appreciate the pain that causes in the discussion context today.
I believe that this was in the paper several times, and it was named that, and it strikes me that...
if I could, I just would ask, have care how we proceed, because if we have a discussion of specifics, it is my proper job in open session and in closed session of council and committee to guide when a red flag's going up. Mm-hmm. So I'm not chastising. It is inherently very difficult to discuss this topic without particulars, and I appreciate that. But if we can try to stick to hypotheticals, it might assist.
Councillor McLaren, I suggest maybe, because we're all familiar with various subject matters, if you place it in the hypothetical without using specifics in a way that we may be able to guess what you're talking about without actually saying it.
In a hypothetical situation, similar to something that may have happened in the past, it seems that some cases would be escaped, would fall through the cracks in this description of when this would appear. Can you speak to those without breaking confidence?
So the goal was to create a model that applies to any tribunal settlement, any discussion of litigation disputes, any other matter that isn't litigious but also falls into section 239(2) as a matter properly before closed session. That can be simply a matter of personal information related to a member of the public. That in itself is a matter that gets you into closed session. So the goal is to create a comprehensive process so that council is comfortable that they're getting the right information and the right opportunity to deliberate at the right point and the right place. When we go through the steps, the first 4 steps are all in closed session. The first one is the idea you're going to get a report. The report will set out the parameters of the discussion. If at that time, in closed session, councilors believe that they don't have all the information or they think the recommended direction is the improper one, immediately that can be a direction to staff. Then staff will go away and come back with an understanding like I kind of have today. We had the April report, now I've come back with more specifics. This kind of repetitious process can occur. And council doesn't need to move on from that. Without being sort of commenting on my relationship with council, at one time a matter, I came back 5 or 6 times to closed session because these were important milestones. It was just that stages of a process were achieved and I needed instructions. So I'm hoping that there wouldn't be a situation where council would feel in closed session that it didn't have the ability to control the question and get the right information before moving on to the next step.
So if I may summarize, if there's a situation which is not before any tribunal and is not litigious at this particular point, but councillors feel that this procedure should be started or should be adopted, we have that option at any time?
It's usually staff that triggers the report in, but of course a motion at council could direct staff to bring a report to closed session to explore a matter.
No, it's actually in closed session for some reason that was not litigious, not before a tribunal as mentioned here, but which council believes that this particular procedure should be applied in closed session. Can we trigger that at the closed session?
Yes, that the idea would be you would want to have a consistent pattern of relationship with the matters that are before you in closed session, so that you would be able to revert to this on subject matters that are properly into closed session, whether they're litigious or not.
So why don't we make that a default instead of an option?
I'm not certain it's if a matter is properly before closed session, this would be the expectation of the process that would be used. Most matters are before closed session because there's legal privilege of one sort or another, but there are many matters beyond legal privilege that bring you into closed session. All those are triggered by a closed session, or most of them, one way or the other, are triggered by a closed session report. And whether you move through these steps quickly or through multiple meetings, it would still be the same process. So for example, if the report comes forward, it's not contentious and there is no extra information needed, you would kind of go to the open session very rapidly. But if there was a matter where more explanation was required or the process was lengthy, months and years long, you could expect to see more than one report in closed session before you go out to open session.
Okay, so Councilor McCarron, you'll always have another option if you think of another question. Any other members of the committee? Ex officio members of council. Councilor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to go through Part C, closed session procedures. As I think you know, I don't want to see the motions that we were seeing on a fairly consistent basis, wherein in closed session, council instructed staff to negotiate a settlement and execute the agreement. And I think this handles it, but I want to be sure, okay? So what would happen is it would come back to council in camera, be voted on, and it would go out to the public and it would be settled. There'd be no debate, and the vote would have already taken place. This has happened a number of times. So that's the kind of motion I don't think is legal, in my opinion, and checking with lawyers and stuff. So I just want to go through this because it's caused an awful lot of trouble with the public. So just on the third, sorry about that, decided to go, here we are. Decided I wasn't using it enough. So on the third bullet, it says, and this seems to address the issue I'm just recapping. Once negotiations are reasonably successful or advanced to another milestone, staff shall report to another closed session for deliberation but no substantial vote. Does that apply to the negotiation? In other words, I'm making the differentiation between staff going and negotiating a potential or proposed agreement with whoever, a developer or whoever the party is, and a settled agreement, which is what's been happening. So that looked promising to me. So I'm not quite sure what if you could clarify what you're saying there, please.
So if you look at page 8 of 13, in the discussion leading up to this on the settlement negotiations, there's a quote from a case. It's a BC case, but the principle applies. It's a common practice, and this court is saying, it's common practice for city staff, either directly or through legal counsel, negotiate and settle terms of a potential agreement that is subject to council approval. Once the terms of agreement are settled, the proposed agreement is taken to council for approval, not at council's discretion. Council's discretion cannot be fettered by city staff or anyone else. Now, the point that also has to be made is, in closed session, because you're having, in a matter like this, instruction and advice to legal counsel, counsel, who as a whole is the client of the lawyer, has the opportunity to have a fulsome discussion before the decision is made. The final process of moving into open session is informed by the closed session debate. The vote occurs in open session, but you only move to open session under this process if council is satisfied and votes to move out. Now, at that point, as is in the report, and as I've reminded council in closed session on a number of occasions over the years, there are things that aren't discussed in the open session. Personal information, trade information, implications. That would all be reviewed at the time before going into open session, so everybody's clear that there are elements that, I mean, when you negotiate, you become very aware of the other side's information. And some of it is information they're very vulnerable to, whether it's personal or corporate or whatever. And that's why that's why there's the discussion in here about this idea of the privilege of settlement negotiations that lawyers get to have. I carry into the closed session that bundle of privilege, and I get my instructions from you. And then council as a whole makes that decision to move into the open session to finalize the process. Is that?
I get that. That occurs later in their points, so that's not where I was at. It's a good answer to a question, no offense, I didn't ask. Okay? The important thing about page 8, as you point out here, is it's a potential agreement. And so I'm just making sure that what we're talking about with what comes to council in camera is a potential agreement. And that some lawyers use it, you've talked about it before, but a substantive decision, right? That hasn't taken place. So it comes to council in camera, council would vote to take the motion to open session. And in open session, it would be debated and voted upon. I'm agreeing, I think I'm agreeing with you.
Correct.
I'm just being sure, because it's not the way things have happened in the past.
As a general matter, the discussion is going forward. I don't think I need to answer further, though. I'm just confirming that you're satisfied.
If what I just said is what's happening, yes.
Acting CAO?
Thank you. So if I understand correctly, the question or what's being asked is, in having dealt with many of these planning-related matter, is that when the proposed settlement gets to council in closed session, there is a discussion in closed session, and council doesn't vote on the settlement. They vote to report out. They fully debate the settlement in public and vote in public. That's what you're asking, correct?
It is.
And I think I'm not a lawyer. That's why we have a city solicitor. I think it is technically maybe feasible, but I don't know that we would have a settlement to work with. I think that's something that council maybe would have to keep in mind.
When we...
Let me just
No,
add to-
let me just add to
Go
that.
ahead.
Okay, let the generalists have a shot at this. No offense.
Remember, these are questions, right? We're not
Oh,
a debate.
They're questions. We're not debating. It's clear what this actually says. So I agree that that's a problem. And when we met, yourself and Mr. McLeod and Councillor McLaren and a couple of the clerk and a couple other people, that was the last thing you said. And so I believe Councillor McLaren and I got the full import of what you were saying. However, the basic nub of the problem is having a motion that's passed in camera that directs staff to negotiate a settlement, and it comes back, and as part of that original closed session motion, it says, and execute the agreement. And the answer I'm saying is, no, that should never be the case legally. What should happen is it should come back to council in closed session, which is fair enough, it's a negotiation. You explain the negotiation, here are the pluses, the minuses, this is what we got, this is what I had to give up, and, you know, we think this is the best we can do. So we trust staff to do that kind of thing all the time. And I'm not questioning that. Somebody's got to do that job, right? So, however, to me, to meet the legal requirement, you have to then, like we did this once, and I don't know if it was the clerk that suggested or not, we put the motion out into the open session, and we did not debate it, but we voted on it. Now, the objection to that Councillor McLaren and I had, that was an improvement, okay? That was definitely an improvement. Was that we never got to debate the issue, like council, whether we were for it or against it, with the substance of the motion. So this is like super important. And this is what the public complains about, that they just get this received decision. And I'm not, so that's the difficulty we're trying to get around. Now, the CAO, acting CAO, has a substantive problem she perceives there, which is, and I'll summarize her comment, since there aren't too many public people here, is basically they'll never negotiate with us. They'll go right to the LPAT or something. I mean, that was the implication. So we don't want that. But, so those are the rock and the hard place that I see. Going to satisfy the public's desire for openness and transparency, or are we losing something on our ability to do business?
There's two constraints when you move from the closed to the open. One is there is information that you can't talk about information and disclose the deliberations if you can't under MFIPA disclose the same record, right? So if the minute of what happens in closed session can't be disclosed, you can't orally just blurt it out. But there's the second reality, is that there may be elements of the transaction that, if they are disclosed, would kill the transaction, that the other side is just not going to do the deal with you on that basis. If that's the situation, I would understand you would be informed of these elements in the closed session so you know what you're facing. And if that is critical in return, then it may be in certain circumstances that council as a whole would decide not to proceed at that point until there was a further negotiation on the element or further information to deal with the element. But that is in the protocol. So that's the idea of before you're going to go into open session, through the report itself and through the advice you're going to get from staff, you're going to get the information as to why we're saying when you go out there, you know, this is not a topic. And we talk about the big money factors. But I'll give another analogy from some time ago. We had a very important question, but it was about a human rights issue. Through the human rights negotiation, and it was very interesting, but I got a lot of information about the particular vulnerabilities of the person in question who was lodging the human rights complaint that we were happy to settle. It had to do certain things to deal with elements of her vulnerability, but we couldn't discuss those elements in open session because not only was it unfair for her to have them disclosed, they actually exacerbated one of her vulnerabilities, and it would have been cruel to do it. So we had to talk about that in closed session and then bring it in open session in a discrete manner that still allowed for the discussion to occur to a level that was satisfactory.
And that's good for that kind of case.
But they're
really,
analogous.
the problem is, yes, it was an analogy as well as a factual case, I think. The big problem is with planning and development, right? I mean, essentially that comes out. I think we would all understand the case you gave as an analogy there. And I accept that they would not negotiate if you were going to release certain types of information, whatever it might be. After all, that's the developer's decision, right? And just like the federal and the provincial governments don't let us say everything we know, right? And sometimes causes all kinds of trouble. So, with the public. So what I'm asking is, I see what you said there. You have said that before we go into open session, you, as a solicitor or whoever, will tell us, these are the things you can't talk about. I'm speaking very broadly, right? Here's the things you can talk about. Don't cross the line. I think the important thing here is that there's enough that you can talk about that you can actually have a debate, as long as everyone's conducting themselves in a reasonable and legal fashion. So on one of your page 11 of 13, I'm just moving this along here a bit. If council is in general agreement with the terms, closed session vote shall be held only for the purpose of deciding if council will report out the matter for council debate and vote in an open session. I think that's really good. That's a real improvement, and I agree with it. What I wanted to know was, when we get out into open session, having voted to push it from closed to open, can we give reasons for voting or not voting for the recommendation? Because otherwise it's not a debate worthy of the name.
We can't give you a rule that applies to every situation, but my understanding would be there will be constraints upon it that will be identified in closed session so that you know the scope of which is the acceptable substantive discussion in open session. It will be partial or fulsome or very restricted depending on the case. But you're going to understand that before you do the vote to go into open session.
Yeah, I get that. That's good. So we will not have motions in front of us that say we negotiated a settlement and it's been executed by the mayor and clerk. Not blaming the clerk or the mayor. That's what the instruction says. The key word to me is executed. That can't, and that the settlement has been made. That can't happen.
Let me give you another example. Let me give you another commercial example. There is a prohibition in MFIPA. We are not permitted to disclose information related to upper level government records that we have received. We have had entire deals that are just that. Literally, we get their template And it's done because it's a matter that isn't open for public review, because it's a matter from upper level government that has the cover page that says so. So we can't sit here and say there will be never the case. It is the intention that you will understand all these things as you move forward. It is the intention that that would be the rarest of cases. But I just don't want you to say, when you say to me never, I don't want to hear in the future, but you said never, because there are these stricter cases.
No, and you won't hear never from me. I didn't mean it that way.
Well, you can actually say that.
Okay, Mr. Chair, the acting CEO is bouncing up and down over there. She wants to say something.
Yes, I take it you want to answer one of the councillor's questions?
Yes, and thanks, Mr. Chair. So, Councillor Hutchison, I understand the question in regards to planning specifically. That's what you're focusing on. And understanding that in the past, and you did reference an occasion where it was reported out in public, I think the first bullet on page 11 is referring to that reporting out, right? That the vote would be an open session. I think the issue would be how much information is being disclosed in terms of, in public as far as the settlement is concerned. Obviously, if councillors start to talk about all the details of the settlement, there would be no more settlement, I'm sure, to try to reach. So the level of information that may be discussed in public may vary depending on the actual application. But I think what you're getting at, and we did struggle with this quite a lot, to try to figure out a process that would enable more transparency in public, but at the same time not take away our ability to negotiate with settlement. You're asking if you would be able to essentially indicate why you're supporting this proposal or not. And I think maybe at a high level that may be feasible without getting into all the details of the settlement. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Sorry, can I just interject? So to paraphrase what you just said, you could, in open session, state in broad terms your support or your opposition to the proposal, as long as you don't disclose the things that we were told not to disclose. That doesn't mean you can't debate, it just means you can't disclose those sensitive details. Is that correct?
That's what I was saying, and exactly what the two staff members are saying. And so that's much an improvement, okay? And I take it, one would say, I'm voting for this or I'm not voting for this for these reasons, and because I don't think we got enough or whatever it is, and then you just let the chips fall where they may. I take it that we would be talking to the other party or in general beforehand, saying, look, the ground rules have changed, however you explain it to them. Sorry about that, but that's what council wants. So we will be changing the nature of the game here. I think in a substantive way, although it's hard to tell, right? But in a good way, for me, from my point of view. And so I'm good. I think I'm good because I realize you can't nail everything down. Okay, thanks.
Karen, before we go back to more questions, maybe we could go to members of the public and then come back in deliberations. This is an ex officio councillor, so he doesn't have a choice. He can only ask questions. But for the rest of us, if we want to, this is going to lead into deliberations, maybe we should go to that, and then you could, unless it's something that's specific only to what was just said, you don't want it lost. Okay, go ahead.
So just sure I understand everything, is it correct to assume that no votes taken in closed session are binding until they are approved in public?
Votes in closed session are binding. They are to be restricted to directions to staff and procedural matters. So you can have procedural matters and votes in closed session related to the holding of the closed session.
Sorry, I should have added the word substantive. There will not be any substantive decisions made in closed session. They will, whatever we decide in closed session will be only valid and promulgated and legitimate and given royal assent or whatever it is that we do here after it's voted on in public. Is that correct?
I have to go to the analogy of the federal government document. Those documents have, through other rules within the provincial statutes, have restrictions on them that you kind of have to have the substantive discussion in the closed session, in the sense that, so you want to just talk about the settlement of the planning. Is that what you mean?
Mostly yes, but even in that case, it would be, we agreed to something in closed session that is ruled by other laws. It only becomes substantive decision made in open session, not in closed session.
Sorry, correct. Get confirmed in open session, correct.
Okay, so we'll go to members of the public who may wish to comment on this item or ask questions. Please state your name and speak into the microphone.
I'm Pamela Cornell. Sorry, and the chair's getting away from me. So I read what City Council asked for last August, and then I plowed through this report, and I needed to wrap a cold, wet towel around my head it was painful. It's ironic that a document purporting to address issues of transparency and accountability in relation to City Council's in-camera meetings should be so opaque. So at their August 7th meeting, 2018, Council gave staff specific direction to come to this committee with recommendations and guidelines for closed meetings. I searched for what would be clear to me anyway, guidelines and recommendations, and I couldn't find them. And there's no reference anywhere to best practices and procedures that are followed in other cities, which would have been illuminating. And it just, disappointingly, this document appears to be little more than an exercise in obscurantism, the practice of deliberately presenting information in an inexplicit and obscure manner, designed perhaps to forestall further inquiry and understanding. So I think the committee should refer this report back to staff and direct them yet again to provide the clear and concise information that Council requested a year ago. Clear and concise. Conducting business in a manner that informs and engages citizens is something all levels of government are grappling with. Much in the news these days is the book Teardown, which I know Rob has read, Rob Kiley, by Dave Meslin, which sets out a variety of ways of ensuring public participation in the formulating of policies that shape our community. Definitely recommended reading. In the meantime, please refer this report back to staff and get the answers you requested. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak? Seeing none, we will go to, we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, so we can move into deliberations. Moved by Councillor McLaren, second by Councillor Kiley. So the recommendation is that the AP committee recommend to Council that A, Council adopt the process for deliberating and voting upon matters received in closed session in accordance with the processes set out in this report, and B, Council will continue to rely on the existing process for disclosure of records related to closed session provided for under the MFIPA. So the motion's on the floor. Does anyone wish to speak? Councillor McLaren.
Do you want to allow staff to respond to the public?
That was actually a comment directed at us, not at staff. So would you can use your time to respond to the member of the public, but it wasn't a question to staff. Any other comments, debate? Mr. Vice Chair, we will take the chair.
Nice, you will take the floor.
First of all, my understanding of the problem, it's a bit of a conundrum no matter how you speak. Different people have minds that work different ways, and at the end of the day, transparency can't be achieved if a segment of the population doesn't understand what just happened. You often get that from comments from members of the public, what just happened? So when there's a closed session involved, we get that more often. And it is very frustrating from where we sit, because not only can we not perhaps state the reasons for our position openly in open session, we can't also tell people anything when they call us, when they corner us on the street or anything like that. That's happened to me time and time again. I'm thinking, for example, the Marine Museum file kept coming up. It's in my district, kept coming up over and over and over, and I always had to say the same thing. It's like, I can't tell you. I can't tell you what happened. I can't tell you what was said. I can't tell you the information that we had or why we made the decision or anything. And it never was resolved. Now that the Marine Museum is coming back, those questions may be going away, but it wasn't a report like this that made anything better. So from my point of view, it may clarify things for us, and that's important, but it doesn't take away the problem that when the light bulb goes on for council in closed session, that we can never actually explain that to the public. We have to be vague, we have to leave out details, which makes us look like we're covering something up, when in actual fact, we're following the rules. There's no way around it, which is why books like that one are so important, because if he can inform, people across the province about how municipalities could do better with that, so that mistrust goes away, so that we're not put in that position as often, that would be great. But it's a gap. The members of the public, of which we are part, have put us in a position without knowing what it is, the constraints that are going to be placed upon us, these constraints that come at us from the legal frameworks and from reports like this. So, the question really is, to respond to the member of the public who has given us a plea to defer this back to staff to do better. The question is, can staff come back later with clearer guidelines, with more helpful report than the one that's in front of us? That's the question. And the only way to answer it is by putting it to a vote of whether we should defer it. So I'm going to move deferral to the next meeting of administrative policies, so that staff has an opportunity to provide more clarity on the rationale for the processes set out in the report. And I would need a seconder.
I have to be chair. I'm looking for a seconder. Can I move to someone else?
Take the chair and I recognize you.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so I'm just going to keep the chair. So there's a motion to defer. Are there any comments with respect to time and place? Seeing none, we will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries.
Okay, that motion is deferred, and we will see it again. Next is item D, discounted fees for municipal programs and services.
Sorry, quick order.
Point of order.
Perhaps you might want to add to do exactly what in that motion. Otherwise, we're just literally.
As presented by Councillor Stroud was defer the item to the next meeting in order for staff to provide more clarity regarding the rationale for the process set out in the report.
So now, item D, we have a briefing with a PowerPoint, so it'll be up on the screen. This is discounted fees for municipal programs and services. There's a recommendation. We will get the presentation, and then we will go through the normal committee process.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here to speak on this topic. I'm going to try in my presentation, to be brief, but to focus in on some key points that have been raised in the two previous reports and in this report. The first slide is our population graph, to just remind members of the committee that we are an aging demographic. We now have 6 generations alive, which is the first time in history that that's happened. I was asked during the public engagement component of this recent work if, in fact, the baby boomers was just a blip and we could ignore it for the next few years and the problem would resolve itself. But as a boomer, I'm telling you that I hope to be around quite a while, so this is probably a 30 or 40-year issue that's going to have an impact on municipalities and countries around the world. So, and you can also see that the millennials also are a large number. So as they age, they will create similar challenges. Just putting this up briefly, it's in your document, but just to show what the LICO, LIM, and LIM 15 thresholds were in 2015. We use 2015 data because the person's data that I'm going to share with you also comes out of the census, and I wanted to make sure we were talking about the same people and numbers at the same time. And these numbers are adjusted every year by Statistics Canada, but I can tell you in the case of LICO, for example, they've only gone up by about $1,000 in each of the categories, so not huge shifts from year to year. So this slide shows the numbers of people in the adult population, those over the age of 18, who are below the various income thresholds. And as we've discussed in previous reports, those over the age of 65 have the lowest levels of poverty. And I wanted to point out that these in this slide are actually cumulative. So the center column, for example, the 25.8 includes the 24.6, and going forward to LIM 15, the 31% includes those in the previous category. So they're cumulative from left to right. And I will say we adjusted this slide from the one that's in your report, which shows 15 to 24. We got data yesterday, actually, from Statistics Canada. So we were able to adjust the data for the youngest age group to just show that 18 to 24 group that we're talking about using as part of the adult population. This slide shows individual incomes, not household incomes. I think it's a bit confusing when we use Stats Canada language in the title, so I apologize for this. Private households just mean it excludes those people who are living in collective dwellings, which are like long-term care facilities, hospitals, etc. These are the people living out in our community that are ones that use our programs, but this is all individual income broken out by age cohorts. Most of the other charts I've shown you, including the one I just showed you, was household income, and we tend to talk about household income. But this one is just individual income. I'm not going to read these out to you, but these are the points that were raised 2 and a bit years ago by Harry Kitchen, who's an economics professor. I think he's retired now, but he taught at Trent, and he came and spoke to council on this issue. He's done a lot of work on the issue of aging demographics and what it means for municipalities and their finances. And basically, he pointed out that times have changed, the population's changed, the income of older adults has changed, and that continuing to provide subsidies to this population results in inequitable and inefficient outcomes, and you have a younger demographic who is potentially paying the bill for an older demographic, and that really the issuance of any kind of discount should be based solely on income. This is going to be hard to see, so please refer to your reports. But I'm answering the questions that were asked in the deferral motion, one of which was who has access to the discounts right now. And again, this was custom data that we received from Stats Canada in order to produce the report that you've got in front of you. So you can see the population 15 to 24 and 65 and over shown in what should be yellow, but it looks a little green on the screen. Those are the people who currently have access to age-based discounts. Underline the access, not using. Those are the people who could choose to use them. And then in the bottom box, same information, but it's those who fall under the LICO who have access to our Municipal Fee Assistance Program, otherwise known as My Kingston. So this was another question you asked in the deferral motion, is who's using the discounts currently. I caution you that there are some assumptions made in these numbers, so I will go over them with you. One thing you should remember is that there are many programs that we offer that are not included in these numbers. For example, the transit passes for high school students and young people are not included. That's not affected by these changes, so we're focused in on the programs and services that would be impacted by any changes council chooses to make. I will also say on the transit numbers for both youth and seniors, when you buy a multi-ride card, we don't get any demographic information on you other than your the age category you're buying a card from. So we had to make some assumptions in terms of numbers of individuals. So the multi-ride passes caused us a bit of a challenge in terms of quantifying individuals. But you can see the numbers there. And these numbers are basically assuming that we don't have duplication. We have no idea whether someone who rides the bus is also taking advantage of a recreation discount. So we may end up with some double counting. We have no way of quantifying that. So given all of that, these are the numbers I have to present to you. About 15% of the youth population are currently accessing these particular discounts. Likewise, about 10% of seniors are accessing the discounts. On the income-based side, through the Municipal Fee Assistance Program, based on 2018 data again, we had about 24, almost 2,500 households apply, representing about 32% of low-income individual or low-income people under the LICO. And that number actually includes children, because when you apply, you're applying for your family. So I wasn't able to pull out just the adult population. Who would lose the discount should we make the changes? Again, this slide is slightly different than the picture in your report, because we were able to break out the 15 to 17-year-old group from the 18 to 24 group based on the data I received yesterday. So those two squares that are blue in the picture are the ones who would lose their access to the discounts if the recommendation to use LIM 15 went forward. Obviously, if you picked a different income threshold, the numbers would increase depending on which threshold you picked. But it would be the 8,695 young adults, 18 to 24, and the almost 21,000 over the age of 65. The 15 to 17-year-olds, you can see that's yellow all the way across because they will count in the youth discounts given our new age cohorts that are recommended. I'm going through this very quickly, I apologize. So here are your options, A to G. A is basically if we did nothing and continue to run the program as it operates today. And we did our best based on all of the assumptions that are listed in the report to cost it out going forward. And you can see that, and in all cases, we referred it back to the $703,000 cost that we spent or lost revenue in 2018. So option A is status quo, and then the rest, B through to G, are listed in order of savings and or cost. And just a reminder that we're recommending option C, which is only providing the income-based discounts and using LIM 15 as our threshold. So the public engagement that was asked for in the deferral motion, we did go through a process just before the summer. We put out a press release, we used social media to get the word out, and we put some more information as well as the information that was already there on our Get Involved platform and carried out a survey. We also had the survey available in 8 or 10 locations across the city for people to pick up the background in the survey in hard copy. We received, and it was out for about 3 weeks, we received 256 surveys back. And as you can see, the results were fairly evenly split across the options. We didn't give the public all the options that you have on your list. We grouped them together. And none of the options actually stated, the survey was done with the assumption that we were going to change, based on the feedback we got through the last public engagement, that we were going to increase the threshold to something. So we didn't ask the question, do you think we should increase the income-based threshold to something higher? Because there was overwhelming support for that last time. So we didn't re-ask that question. We really wanted to deal with the age-based side of it. And what the options were. So those 4 options were laid out, and as you can see, it was fairly split across the 4 options, with the strongest results being for only providing income-based discounts or continuing age-based discounts as they are. So last time around, just to reference, when we asked a similar question in the last survey, it was about a 60-40 split, 60% in support of, 40% in not getting rid of age-based discounts. So again, it was a split back then as well. This is not a new visual. It actually came from our last public engagement work, but I can tell you that this is very similar language to what I heard in the 250 odd surveys that we received this time around. Similar sentiments were raised in the comments. In the exhibit in your report, there's some actual quotes from the comments, but these are the words we heard from those people who were voting for the option of either leaving things alone or didn't like any of the options. These were many of the words, and they're kind of sized based on how many times we heard those terms or synonyms of those terms. And this is the flip side. These are the people who felt strongly about making changes and the need to deal with the income side. And again, this is taken from the last report, but very similar comments this time around about fairness and equity. And so to summarize, I think I did that in less than 10 minutes. The recommendation is option C, which is to increase the income threshold to LIM 15 effective January. of 2020, so this coming January, and at the same time to discontinue the age-based discounts in order to have the results that are in that costing slide. The other recommendation is to standardize our age categories between our different program areas. There was different age thresholds, so a child and a youth weren't always defined as the same. We want to clarify those definitions. So children will be 14 and under, youth will be 15 to 17, and adults will be all those over the age of 18 to 110, wherever it ends on the other end. Continue making operational improvements. We talked about this last time we came before you. We're certainly trying to improve the intake process. It is there's concern raised by some in their questionnaires about the intake process. Some aren't used to having to go through that. It is an incredibly simple process. We've streamlined it as narrowly as we can do, but still verify that we're talking about Kingstonians and not people who don't live in Kingston, and that they do fall under the income thresholds, which really is looking at one line in their NOA. It's really that straightforward. It can take less than 5 minutes depending on the size of your household and the number of people, and we're also looking at moving as of 2020 to a 2-year eligibility, so you won't have to come back annually. Because we found over time that the same people's income doesn't change year to year, so we're hoping that will ease people's burden. The other thing we're going to try and do and move to do, we did this originally when we started My Kingston, we moved a bit away from it, is doing intake off-site, not needing to come to 362 Montreal, but having clinics. We used to do them downstairs at City Hall, in addition to doing an online portal, which I think is a really critical piece. The City of London, which went through a similar process, as you might recall, a couple of years ago, and removed their age-based discounts, moved to a low-income program. They use an online portal for most of their intake for the program. So we're working, as we speak, on getting that up and operational as soon as we can. So again, the rationale for making this change is, as Harry Kitchen I quoted, inequitable and inefficient outcomes to continue to provide age-based discounts. The primary goal of providing discounts is to address financial barriers in accessing programs. And the option we're recommending, option C, provides the greatest access to the low-income community, going to LIM 15, without putting additional pressure on our property tax base, which we're very cognizant about as well. Questions? I talk very fast, so.
Hang on to your questions. I was going to move to the business item and then start with questions. So merge those two things. So thank you for the briefing. So now we're at business item D, and as in the package. So you'll see the recommendation there and the report. And so now we go to questions about the report. Councillor Hall.
Thank you for the presentation. 2 questions. The first one, regarding, just because you touched on it sort of towards the end, the intake process and feedback that you received. When you did receive the feedback from residents, I know when we spoke about this last time, there were concerns about that many low-income seniors would either find it difficult to prove eligibility or would find it just to be a hardship for them personally to kind of go and declare their low income publicly in a way. I'm wondering about the intake process and how you said that it was simple, just to kind of clarify what that means, particularly for low-income seniors.
Through you. Absolutely. We're cognizant that it's a shift for people if they're used to getting a discount, in essence, just because of their chronological age, so there's no process to go through. I think people are fearful of a process without ever having to gone through it. As I said, we've kept the process for people who have gone through it as simple and as streamlined as we possibly can. I think making changes such as doing eligibility intake at places like the senior center where people may be more comfortable will help with that intimidation factor. I think once you've gone through it, we surveyed our My Kingston clients a couple years ago to see what we could do to improve the system. Those people being users of the system to find out what we could do, and it was incredibly supportive of what we're doing. They found the process very respectful, not at all intimidating, but I do understand that sharing your income can be intimidating for people. There's no way around that if you're providing an income-based program. So I think our goal is to make it as streamlined, as quick, giving people options like doing it online versus coming in to an office anywhere and meeting with someone. But certainly we're open to, and one of the other recommendations is to evaluate in a couple of years, and certainly that would be something we're looking at. Who are we serving? Are there populations? Right now there's very few seniors that are able to access the My Kingston program, because if you look back to the numbers, there's very few seniors who fall under the LICO because of government programs that bring them up above that income threshold. So we don't have a lot of seniors coming through the door, and the ones that we do tend to get turned away because their income is over the threshold. That is something we certainly don't want to have to be doing, which is why we're recommending increasing it. But certainly we're trying to make the program as easy as we can. We'll be doing some more promotion, working with our communications staff. But at the end of the day, we have to have verification that you live in Kingston, and we have to have verification of what your income is. But that's basically it. It's a very simple process. And again, once you're approved, you get a card that allows you to do everything other Kingston Transit riders do in terms of buying monthly passes wherever you're comfortable doing that once you've been approved. So we try and make the program as easy as we can for people, and try and make it as respectful so you're not standing out in the crowd as being someone who's different than everyone else. But I think going off-site will help some people, because just coming into 362 Montreal, I know, can be a barrier for some people who aren't used to using that facility. So.
Thank you. And the second question is regarding the enhancements to the program. Or it mentions that there is intention to increase the services, access to services for people who fall under low income, so including things like the low income dental program that currently exists and the municipally funded benefits that have been made available to people who fall in that sort of working poor category, who don't access other services, other programs for those. So I'm curious about the various options. So with option C, the one that you've recommended, those enhancements are possible and built into the costing, but is that the case with all of the options?
So we costed out the options. Everything that falls under the umbrella of My Kingston will be available to a larger number of people. Some of the components of My Kingston, which weren't included in the costing, like the pet vouchers to have your pet spay and neutered, have fixed budgets, annual operating budget amounts attached to them. So they were not included in the costing, but those programs will be available to a larger population. And I can tell you, in the case of the spay and neutering program, people come in, apply, get their voucher, and then we have a large percentage who don't actually have their pet spay and neutered. So we recycle those vouchers every quarter based on utilization, to stretch them out as far as we can go in the course of a calendar year and make sure that they're all utilized. So we don't perceive at this point that there's going to be issues with that. But to answer your question, everything that's available under the My Kingston program for those who are currently under the LICO will be available to those under LIM and under LIM 15, to the max of, in those cases, the programs that have fixed budgets.
Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, and thank you. I really enjoyed reading it, and you've answered many of my questions about the report in your presentation, so thank you for that. Two that jumped out at me were from, I didn't catch what slide number it was, but I can tell you what figure it was. It was it said page 8. It was the blue boxes with the people who are quote unquote losing the benefit.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify the language there. So the blue box is additional number of individuals living in a household with income above limb 15. That isn't actually the number of people who are using the program currently. We heard that it's about 15% of seniors. So in the population 65 plus, it's 15% of the 20,645. So really, it's only a few thousand people who would be losing the benefit. Is that accurate?
Yes, that are currently using it, absolutely. So those are people who fall over the threshold that could access it, but you're absolutely right. When you factor in who's actually using it, it's probably 3,000 to 4,000 of those blue people.
Right, okay, good, that's helpful. And then the second question was, looking at my notes here, is the 15% of youth and 10% of seniors who are currently using our programs lower than normal for a city of our size or of a program of this scope? It seemed a bit low to me.
Yes, thank you, and I was going to mention that and forgot to answer that question in my presentation. I don't know if it's low compared to other jurisdictions. I can tell you a few things. In the case of age-based discounts, this is not inclusive of, for example, the high school program and some other big programs when the majority of young people are accessing services. So that's one of the reasons these numbers seem low. The other is in the case of age-based discounts for young people and seniors, they have options available to them, other recreation facilities, other fitness centers, other modes of transportation. So that is probably another factor that you need to consider in terms of who's using the programs. I heard from some people, for example, that seniors don't use public transit because they want to keep their cars. I have no factor to prove that, but if they're able to afford a car and they have a car, they're likely to continue to use their vehicle. So that would be impacting those numbers as well. In the case of the income-based numbers, again, you know, the percentage of people living under the LICO who are accessing the program has remained fairly steady across the time we've had that program. Because people who are living in low-income households, quite frankly, have a lot of barriers in addition to financial. So we have more people, for example, who come through the door to apply, but don't end up buying a transit pass and or, you know, signing up for a program at Artillery Park. These are multi-barriered people. I think once we increase the threshold, so we're now dealing with populations who are potentially more out in the community, working, et cetera, we may see those numbers grow up because we're talking about a different group of individuals. Primarily that program now is people on social assistance or close to being on social assistance because the thresholds are very, very low. So I think those are the reasons those numbers are the way they are. But I can't tell you compared to other communities that have similar programs. I can tell you in York Region, their transit program, which also uses LIM 15, is undersubscribed. They were surprised at how few people are using it, and their transit programs, I must tell you, are their monthly pass is much more expensive than our monthly passes. So they thought it was a very important program to have and to have a fairly high threshold, but they're examining now why the program's undersubscribed, and it may be some of the same reasons I just gave you in terms of barriers that people are having aside from income-based barriers.
No, that's good context, and I agree with that thought process. My last question for now, at least, is concerning the threshold. So you're recommending LIM 15, but on the chart that you had that showed the cost savings over time, maybe you could go back to that.
Oh. I'll find it. That one?
It looks like there's still flexibility to potentially go higher and stay under what we're paying now. Is that a correct way of reading that? So what if we went to LIM 16 or 17, if that's even a stat that we could determine, that could still keep us in at under zero. So it could be still a negative cost So pay less than we are now and actually increase the service capacity. Is that possible?
Well, frankly, anything's possible. I think the reasons you'd want to be cautious going there is because the closer you get to 40, 50% of the population receiving a discount, the less impactful it is and the more pressure it puts on the remainder. And again, there were a lot of assumptions that went into these numbers pushing forward. The population, the poverty rates remaining the same, et cetera, they're listed in your report. So I'd be cautious that these numbers aren't written in stone. These are based on current utilization rates going forward with population growth. The poverty rates remaining the same, program costs going up at the rate we think program costs are going to go up. So there were a lot of assumptions. This wasn't a scientific exercise. We tried to do it as strategically as we could in terms of being fair. But, you know, it may not be a -4. It could be on par to our current costs, so.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's fair as well. But given those numbers, -8% by 2021 and -4 by 2026, to me it seems, even with all those assumptions, that's enough flexibility that we probably would never end up paying more than we are currently. Is that also fair to say?
Age-based discounts have the most financial impact going forward. They're the most expensive piece of the puzzle. So not having those does create some room. I would suggest if you want to go to a higher threshold, you wait and see what happens in a couple of years once we do our analysis, because making the operational changes we're making, for example, may have more people coming through the door, and we certainly don't want to be turning people away either. So that's why we went with LIM 15. It was we were comfortable with the impact it was going to have fiscally, but it would also get lots of people through the door. And LIM 15 is a fairly common, or becoming a more common threshold to use. And again, I caution you that if you make the threshold so high, you end up at a point that maybe you should just lower the overall cost of whatever the service is, rather than discount half and make other people pay more to offset it. That's where it becomes inequitable.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful.
Acting Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you. So I just maybe want to the question about is it fair to say that with LIM 15 we would still be under essentially what we're currently paying? I wouldn't want to make that statement. I think based on the assumptions that are included in the model, I would say we feel that we may be close to what we're currently spending, and I think, yes, a couple of years in terms of working through and seeing where things are at could enable us to come back and make some changes to the program.
Thank you. Personally don't like this recommendation, and because there seems to be two questions that are being convoluted here.
Point of order, questions only.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask
Okay,
a
no
question as a
opinions,
result
just
of this. I'm going to ask a question, I'm setting it up. So, two questions that are being convoluted here. On the one hand, we're being asked to get rid of the age-friendly or the age seniors discount, and on the other, we're being asked to raise the low income to the LIM. Why are these two being convoluted into one recommendation? They should be two separate questions.
Through you, Mr. Chair, one is in order to cost out the cost of providing discounts, we have to look at both sides of the equation. We gave you options for both. We could have laid it out income-based options A, B, C, D, E, and age-based options A, B, C, D, but we needed to look at the impacts on both sides, which is why they were combined into all of these options to show you what the end result will be fiscally going forward. So that's why they were together, because they aren't inclusive of one another. Age-based discount cost attached to them, income-based discounts. So without showing you change to one and what the impact has on the other, it would be a challenge. So that's why we presented them the way we presented them.
Acting CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and maybe just add to that, so the removal of the age-based discount does create the financial capacity for the city to increase the level of subsidy for individuals with low income without increasing taxes. And I think that's what we were looking at. Having said that, you do have some options that provide both of them, age-based discounts and using LIM 15. That is projected to have an impact of 37% increase and then 50% in the future. Council could choose that. We would have to work with that through the budget. I'm not sure what that looks like, but we did lay out all the different options, but one does create the financial capacity for the other.
So one of the ways we could do it is by balancing one off the other, but we're also aware that there are 8 different strategies to do this that were discussed during the third crossing debate, and we used them all there. It seems that this is tying our hands in one direction. We have to do one and the other instead of actually separating them all out, because I would like to vote for half of this, but not for the other half. And so if we're going to do it this way, I would have to vote against it until we can get to the better option.
Point of
which is-
order, questions?
Yeah, I'm getting to it. So could you recommend which?
You know what? I'm going to actually ask for a mover and a seconder because, again, we're drifting into deliberations. Yeah. So everyone gets a chance to ask a couple of questions, and then we will move to deliberations where you can ask your questions, because this this idea of injecting your opinions during questions is not something I like in my committees. So, do you have a direct question?
How can we do this such that we do both? Keep the discounts for seniors and raise the from low income to LIM?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's F and G. Option F being continue to do exactly what we're doing when it comes to age-based discounts and raise the threshold to LIM. And option G is, again, continuing age-based and going to LIM 15. And as CAO Hurdle pointed out, that has the most impact fiscally going forward, but that's certainly an option that you can consider. I tried to do every combination possible on this chart. The only one that's not here, because we heard overwhelmingly last year when we did our public engagement, was leaving the threshold at LICO, because LICO is doing a disservice to a huge percentage of our population living in poverty, especially seniors.
So question to the chair, May?
Go ahead.
Since I like this particular one, how best we move to the one that I do like? Would you suggest I vote this down, or should I make an amendment?
I suggest you wait till we get to deliberations before you jump to what you're going to do, because we're in questions about clarity right now, so that we can understand what it is we're going to be voting on. Not questions about solutions, but questions about clarity. Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, actually. When did the discount program first become established in the city of Kingston?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to clarify, the age-based discounts or the income-based discounts?
Income-based.
Income-based started, I think, in 2011 was the first year we introduced the My Kingston program. Might have been in 2010, but Jeremy's here, he might remember. I think it's been almost 10 years we've had the program going, so.
Okay. And what is the income verification process?
So again, when you come in and if they're walk-in appointments, you don't need to let us know you're coming. There's always someone available. You basically are asked to bring in either your NOA or any government documentation. It could be your child tax benefit statement, anything that shows the children in your family, if that's an issue. Or if you're, a single senior, basically your NOA line 236 is what we look at that shows your net income. We compare it to the threshold. That's basically all we're doing. We give you a little wallet card that you can take to use for both your recreation subsidy and your transit subsidies. You can use it at the box office of the Grand Theatre to get your discounts. If you want some of the other programs like the health and dental benefits, you can do that as well while you're there. It's really open to whatever aspects of the program that you and your family want to have. But the income verification is short.
Thank you. That was more than I needed. I just was curious of what the issue was. What does it cost to administer this program? And I'm assuming it's above the cost you're listed on these columns.
There is no additional cost for administration of the program. It's part of the Housing and Social Services budget, and staff at Housing and Social Services perform the intake as part of their duties. So when they're not, they have a schedule to take the walk-in appointments, and when they're not doing that, they're doing their other Housing and Social Services work. So it's done as efficiently from a management perspective as we can make it. So no, there's no additional line items for this program.
You, in the report on the recommendations, you say that this gives the greatest access to low-income community without pressure on the tax base. So where is this money mysteriously coming from if there's no pressure on the tax base?
That comment was made in reference to the actual recommendation, option C. When you go from D through to G, there will be additional pressure on the property tax base. But currently, the costs are a combination of actual fixed costs and lost revenue. And the majority of it is lost revenue.
All of these costs, then, vacation, any of those numbers you pick on that screen for 2120 or 2126, all of them represent a fiscal cost to the taxpayer. Is that correct?
It's a combination of, as I indicated, lost revenue, so the difference between the discounted rate and the full cost, as well as actual costs in the operating budget.
Okay, I'm not going to debate it further. It's a cost.
I think what you're looking for, it's the cost of the program that started 10 years ago. Over time and where it was in 2018.
I was trying to assess that, but it's not clear to me. But so essentially, if you were, I know where Councillor McLaren was going with what he likes, and I think we're doing two systematic changes here. You're proposing to get rid of discounts for seniors. And my concern that this consultation took place during the summer, where a lot of seniors aren't really paying attention.
Hang on, wait till we get to the
yeah, sure. So the quantity of people in this was 235 people. 200.
I'd have to look it up. I think it was more like 256.
256 people. For such a dramatic change, in your opinion, is that a significant sample size to make a decision like this to change the program?
Similar to our last survey, it is representative of households in our community, so it's a representative sample. I just want to clarify that what we're recommending is not eliminating seniors' discounts, but eliminating discounts for people who are above an income threshold. So a large number of seniors in our community, if we use LIM 15, will still have access to a discount, and in fact, a discount at 50% rather than a discount at 25 or 20% depending on the program. So I know it's confusing, and it is confusing talking about two programs simultaneously, but in my perspective, we have to, but certainly we're not eliminating discounts for seniors. There's a large number of seniors, as that chart shows, that will still have access to discounts in the scenarios.
So my final question is, would it not be more prudent to have an incremental change if you're going to eliminate age-based discounts, than stay at, say, number B, LMIAT? And then see how the uptake is and move forward before you start increasing the threshold? That was my question.
That's That's a rhetorical question. Essentially, both you and Councillor McLaren are showing your hands, which option that you prefer, which is totally fine, but just not during questions. So, Acting CAO Hurdle, did you have anything more to add?
Thank you, and through Mr. Chair, I just want to add a consultation that was done as well, I believe last year, which was in around the fall, winter time. This is not the first time that we've gone to the community, so this is round 2 actually of consultation. Now, I do appreciate that seniors that do go away in the south, for example, in the winter time, might not have participated the last time around. And to be completely frank, those would be seniors that would now have to most likely pay. One would assume that if they're away during the winter south, that they would probably be above the threshold that we're looking at. But seniors that are on fixed income would still very much qualify for these discounts.
Okay. I need a mover and a seconder. Oh no, we need to go to members of the public. Sorry. Members of the public, and then we will deliberate. Seeing none. Okay, I need a mover and a second. Moved by Councillor Holland, second by Councillor Kiley. So I think it's at this point, through all the questions and the presentation, it's clear what we're talking about. The recommendation is in front of us that we recommend, and then there's the 4 clauses. So essentially, the recommending option C from the report, which is the eliminating of the age-based discounts, using only income-based discounts, and raising the threshold to LIM 15. That the age categories and rates of the fees bylaw be standardized to reflect the new definitions of a child being age 14 and under, a youth being age 15 to 17, and adults being 18 and over. That staff continue to make operational improvements to the My Kingston program, including the creation of an online application portal, processing applications at alternate locations, and moving to a 2-year eligibility approval to make it more accessible to all low-income residents in the community. And that staff will conduct a review of the discount program 2 years after implementation and report the results back to council. That's the recommendation. Who wishes to go first? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I am absolutely excited about this proposal. I think that it is good fiscal policy. We see from this chart that it will actually cost the city less. Of course, it draws from tax coffers because that's how we fund our programs. So I think the fact that we can do more with less is a good use of taxpayers' money. I think that we are serving people better with this type of targeted approach. For example, as was just mentioned, seniors who do qualify under the new approach will actually be getting more of a discount than those that do currently. So we're actually helping seniors more than we already are. And again, it's costing less. And most importantly for me, representing my constituents tonight, it addresses a very thorny problem for our society right now, which is precarious work and also the working poor. I'm not sure if that is the correct terminology currently, but people who work full-time hours, sometimes overtime hours at minimum wage, and still at the end of the day can only afford the basic necessities of life. And this hit home on my first day of canvassing for this past municipal campaign, where I talked to a gentleman on Davis Drive, and he told me that he works 40 hours or more to pay for shelter, to pay for food for his family. His wife works part-time because she stays at home with the kids in the other hours of the day. Their combined income would not allow them to qualify for the current cutoff, but they don't have enough money to pay for sports for their kids. They don't have money to put their kids in rec programs with some of their peers. So they're in this really weird in-between. They're just scraping by to provide what they need to live, but not enough to participate fully in our community. And that's a big problem. And this policy is a direct response to that. It allows for people who are working full-time at minimum wage to have a discount, a significant discount at that, because we're using the LIM 15. And for that reason, I think that we should support this. I also think in the most basic way, it appeals to a very progressive idea that if you have more, you should pay more, and if you have less, you should pay less. And that way, we can have more equitable outcomes. And I think that if we take this type of mind, providing better and more service at less cost to all our policy, our city will be very sustainable now and in the future. So please, please, for the finances, for the people that it serves, vote in favor of this.
Thank you. Next, Councilor.
My question to you, may I suggest, or may you suggest, if I would like to go with a different letter, do we make an amendment or do we vote this down and then offer another option?
Yes, amendment would be in order. You would essentially create another category, explain it in your amendment, and if it well, okay. So there are two ways you could go. You could, well, the recommendation is to take option C. So if you don't want that, but you want one of the other options on the list, you would vote against the recommendation. We can separate the clauses if you're in favor of some of them, like the redefining of the categories and so on. But if it's the option C that you don't like and you want a different option, and it's one of the other ones, then yes, you would vote against the recommendation for, or that one clause of the recommendation. But that's voting against the motion. Right. Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, but I think really we need to know, the first thing we need to know as a committee before we start looking at other options is whether we have support for the recommendation. So it really, rather than amending it, we should be voting on the recommendation. And if we vote down the recommendation, then we can propose another option. The other way to do it would be to propose an amendment to see if you have support for your amendment, but you're doing that kind of blind because you're not sure what other people might support. So does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. In that case, now we can make comments?
Yes.
Thank you. So again, the main point that I do like is that we can move to from low income to LIM. That seems a just thing to do. To tie it to this other one doesn't seem absolutely necessary. We have lots of things that we do that cost us money. For example, parks, buses, lots of services that we provide to the city that are not connected to this and don't have to be, but they could be if we wanted them to. So linking them together like this isn't necessary. And the main reason that I would like to keep the seniors discount, and I just want to clarify here, when I speak of seniors discount, I'm talking about the universal seniors discount. So although some seniors may, under this new regime, have a discount, it's not a universal. That's the difference. So when I'm talking about seniors discounts, we're losing the universality of it. And the thing about the universality about it is that everybody, no matter who you are, rich or poor, you always make less money the day after you retire than the day before you retire. And in recognition of that, we have seniors discounts because the retirement age is 65. That's where it is. And despite the law saying that we can't force anybody out, there are a whole bunch of pressures, maneuvers, techniques that employers use to move people who are 65 out of the workforce. Those pressures are there, whether you like it or not, and whether the law allows it. That is something that is a discrimination against older people that is still with us, even though it's illegal. And seniors discounts allow this. And when I'm talking again universal. A second reason is that they have been around for a long time. They've contributed to our society more than anybody who's younger. That's part of becoming older. You contribute more throughout your entire life to whatever it was. If you were a mailman or if you were a garbage collector or a doctor, you're contributing more. And your pension may have some of that, but you're always making less after you retire than before. In recognition of that universal fact, that's why we have this, why we originally had this. The idea that it's only for people who can't afford things, that's what what income-based discounts are for, and there's no reason why we can't have both. To say that we can't have both is not opening up to the possibilities out there. We're narrowing down to something that is a false choice. So for that reasons, I'm going to vote against this.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, just to respond to the previous speaker's statement about whether or not we can have both, the report doesn't say, obviously, that we can't have both. It does say that we can. What it says, that the elimination of age-based discounts provides a more equitable path towards subsidizing, because this is not, these tax dollars that we're talking about are not just our tax dollars. They are the tax dollars of people, residents who we represent, and that is the decision. The decision is what is the best, most equitable use of tax dollars to subsidize programs for individuals. Where should those funds be directed? They should be directed for the best use, the most equitable use, the most value for money, if we want to put it that way, should be targeting individuals who do not have the ability to pay for these services that they would benefit from. And on that point, the strategic plan of council, there was something in there regarding using a health equity lens when we discuss policies. This approach, option C, addresses health inequalities that come from social determinants of health. So income, lack of access to opportunities in the city, lack of access to transportation, all these are barriers not just to participation and full enjoyment of the city, but they reduce the overall health of a population. They impede the ability of individuals in the city to live and achieve the same health outcomes that others have, and frankly, that they can take for granted that they will have. So reducing barriers in the form of a greater level of subsidy for transit for individuals who need that transit to access grocery stores, to access programs, to access employment opportunities throughout the city is what this policy, this recommendation, is asking us to do. And that is good policy. That is recognizing a problem, recognizing a need, and coming up with a solution. The ability to provide more seniors with greater levels of discount is what this option is telling us to do. Let's just think about our climate emergency situation for a moment, if we increase the ridership on transit, if we provide greater, deeper discounts for transit for those who rely on transit, reducing it from a 20% discount to a 50% discount through the My Kingston Pass, those individuals will be taking transit and not contributing significantly to greenhouse gas emissions in the city. Also, increased transit ridership means more federal gas tax money that gets reinvested into our transit system. So, the fact that there are people who are currently eligible for discounts, and let me remind everybody, they're not just seniors discounts, they are age-based discounts. This entire report references age-based discounts, not seniors discounts versus income. We tend to be framing it that way because we consider a certain segment of the population to be disadvantaged by this proposal, and I don't see that. There are many people who will continue to be eligible. Those who will be eligible and receive these discounts need them the most. That is by far the best approach to looking at any policy decision. Difficult decisions that we have in front of us as a council, this option is the one that is clearly the most equitable and provides the best benefit without relying on taxpayers to continue to subsidize further discounts based on age, based on a very arbitrary, line. If you look at the federal level, the federal government makes a distinction between entitlements and between between benefits, and that is in the form of income programs that are based on need. So the federal government does it. There are lots of reasons to incentivize through discounts at the municipal level, but we have limited funds, and the best use of the money is option C.
Councillor Chappelle, would you like to speak?
Lots to say, actually. Fundamentally, if we're getting rid of seniors discounts, I really enjoyed the presentation by Councillor McLaren, and I'm very much in tune with what he's saying. The seniors have given their lives. They were the ones that worked through World War II. They went through the Depression, and I don't believe many of them are actually taking the the discounts. I think we're less than 1,000 or so that are utilizing it. So it's really relatively underutilized, but it's the perception that we've acknowledged them, they've reached this milestone, they've delivered children, they've raised their kids, they've done the best they can. I have a fundamental problem with taking away that seniors discount based on age. It's been sort of a rite of passage to many seniors. In fact, a few times I've been at McDonald's and I've gotten a discount on the coffee, and I'm like, wow, this council's causing me so much gray hair. I'm passing as a senior. This is awesome. To argue, if you're going to, maybe I would go to the great extreme and say, if you're going to get rid of seniors discount based on age, fundamentally this program has been around since 2010, 2011. Why would we even have a discount to begin with? We're all complaining that we don't have enough money to go around. We keep raising the rates for services for hockey kids, for people playing sports. It's raise. So it's the little people that are above, say, the $50,000 threshold that are paying for everyone. Because if you made more than $100,000, you're going to be having investments and defer your taxes with RSPs, all those things. So it's the real working poor is actually above that threshold. So if we were to look at this and say, I just asked the question about maintaining at the LICO, there'd even be more changes of this stuff. The way it's presented now is there's no tax burden. Well, there is a tax burden. Anyone you pick, there's a tax burden, whether it's the savings, the discount of the lost revenue, or the actual impacts. So this will continue to climb in costs. It will be, if we take a picture of this and look at it in 2026 when some of us are dead and gone or off council or what have you, I will bet $1,000 to anybody that those numbers are going to be way out of whack, and it's going to be substantially higher if you go with the LM15. If we're to do a change and cancel seniors' age-based discounts, then why wouldn't we do it in baby steps? You jump from the LICO to the LM15. Why not go from the LICO to the LMAT and then revisit that in 2 years and say, well, we don't have enough uptake, we need to raise the bar. We have a significant problem coming forward in that we are going to be hit with provincial changes that we haven't seen yet. And so to commit us to doing something like this without taking into account the changes that are coming down the pipe from the provincial government, I think we're putting ourselves at a risk to be in a very difficult and precarious situation financially. So these costs are going to increase substantially. We're not going to have a means to back away from it. So I would argue that I think we're jumping too far too fast. And to the counter argument of Councillor McLaren, where he would like to go a little further faster, I could live with arguing away from giving any discounts whatsoever, and focus on debt reduction and free up that $16 million in debt servicing and reduce our cost of services so that everybody can afford them. So I can't support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchison, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I would. I got a couple of questions. I didn't get a chance to question the staff when presenting. I'm just interested in, if I can find them here. When it says who is, I'm interested in the seniors discounts question. And that is, who is eligible to receive age-based discounts? And the answer in terms of seniors is 24,015. That's on page 58. The down below, and this, I'm not saying these aren't compatible, it's just hard to tell. Who's at risk of losing discounts? Well, potentially, I think that's what that part is, and that's on page of the report, it's 9 of 16. That's probably how I should have given it to you. So that is, for seniors, that would be, it says between 20,645, but I think it just means 20,645 individuals could be at risk of losing those discounts, because it is universal. So my concern is, am I reading this properly? That's really my question. at this
Through you,
point.
Mr. Chair, that's correct. The,
I just didn't understand why the two numbers were different, that's all.
sorry, which two numbers are different?
Who's eligible and who's in risk of losing discounts? If it's universal, that would be all the seniors. Right? They would be eligible and they would lose it.
Okay, so in
Oh,
the,
unless you're taking into account some of them are low income. I don't know.
yes.
Okay.
So to clarify the difference between the two charts, the numbers are the same, but to clarify in this chart, you can see for the population over the age of 5, into this 24,015, and of those, 20,645 live above limb 15. Are you with me? Does that make sense? And the rest are below limb 15. So column 2, 3, and 4, those below LICO, those below limb AT, and those below limb 15 would still qualify for a discount in the new recommended option. So that's the number difference. So when you look here, same numbers, but it's those that fall above limb 15 who are actually going to lose access to a discount, whereas those in the previous columns will still have access to income-based discounts using limb 15. Am I making sense, Councillor Hutchison?
I think, I'm not sure I'm following it, but
Okay.
when I look here, I just see that these people still qualify after the changes. Essentially,
All the
that's what you're
people
saying.
in yellow still qualify for discounts,
They're not in yellow for me, but okay, fair enough.
or green, or whatever color.
And they're aside, okay, so
Just-
my concern is that,
Hang on a sec. So, Councillor Hutchison, remember we're voting on option C, so that frame your comments like that's what we're voting on tonight. So, the question is whether or not we ought to vote on option C.
whether or not we should, right? Well, my interest here is similar to what I said before. I find that this option C is, I know what staff is trying to do, but I'm very concerned about what happens under option C, and that's what I want to voice. And I'm looking at it from this point of view. We're talking about the people being under LICO or under limb 15 being the poor. However, that doesn't take into account people that are economically challenged that are under those measures technically not poor. But if you use the poverty indicator that if you're spending 30% of your gross income or more on rent, which is the general poverty indicator for the last close to 50 years. I think it's important for the committee to realize that if a person is one person living in a one bedroom and it costs you $925, which is actually on the low side for a one bedroom, they would be, if they paid that rent, they would be spending 43.6%, I just did this calculation, of their income if the person on limb 15 at $25,453 were in a one bedroom and paying $925, they would pay 43.6% of their income. What happens is that anybody over 25,453 and then how much, okay, so then ask yourself the question, how much before you get to 30%? Well, you would have to be earning $37,000. Okay? So, now, that's what concerns me, the people not covered under C. The people that are very modestly incomed, worked all their lives, got a pension, but don't, as we all know, not very many people have really adequate pensions. I understand why people would not want people making $60,000 a year to maybe get these benefits. But there's a whole raft of people, in fact, I would suggest most of them, who are not near that amount. And so my point is that those over 25,453, but still making, say, $35,000 a year, are still defined as poor if you do the calculation based on household rent payments. And so that's what gets missed here. And that's where I think we're going to have trouble with the population when they figure this out. Because it's the little things, the little discounts here that we're giving that give some quality to their lives. They get the little transit thing, they get the recreation thing, they get the cultural thing, and I've heard from them. You know, and I expect if we go ahead with this, we're going to hear a lot more. And that's what we heard last time. So we've upped it, and I appreciate it that it was upped by staff, okay? It was a good move. It's a good try. But I think what we should be doing is lowering, not saying, okay, we're going to cut all the people on the universal benefit off entirely. We should bring that we should adapt a different universal universe. We should drop that until and then incrementally see what it's going to cost us. And so that's why if I had a vote, I might vote against this. Because I think it affects a lot of people who are not like truly and sharp end of the stick poor, which is what staff are trying to address. And what a couple of councillors referred to. That's all very good, but it's still a problem for a lot of people, and that's where my doubts come, and that's the comment I wanted to make, and I'd like people to think about that, however they vote, because it's got to come to council. Some things, it's not, I don't think, fair to drop the universal aspect for everybody, okay? Mind you, staff might want to point out that some low-income people are still being covered to our seniors. That's legit. And the staff's got their hand up.
Thank you. Through you, just to clarify, one of the thoughts that came up in our last round of consultation was doing it based on disposable income, which is really the point that you're raising, is that not everybody under the same income thresholds has the same dynamics in terms of their life and their expenses. The flip side to trying to do that becomes a very intrusive process of people bringing in every receipt for everything in their lives. And what we heard was people don't want an intrusive process. They want something simple. So using after-tax income was the simplest, understanding that everybody living under 35,000 or 25,000 isn't in the same situation. We heard that from people with disabilities, for example, having extra expenses. However, by raising the threshold, we're hoping we can give those folks access to some services they didn't already have access to. So the other comment I just wanted to point out that we haven't talked about was option D and E, which again, you asked in the deferral for some sliding scale type options. So just to point out, the D and E still provide the universality that some of you have spoken to, but it lowers the depth of the discount to 15% from the current 25 and 20%. So all the people who currently get a discount will continue to get a discount. It will just be less of a discount. And then obviously, depending on which of the income-based thresholds you use, the cost is different between those. But I just wanted to make sure you are aware of all of your options before you start picking through the alphabet.
Okay, I just want to bond, the staff said, this is after tax income in these charts, and I was talking gross. So, well, because I was trying to calculate what the rent would be, how many people would qualify and at what level, right? So, this is not a criticism of what staff said. It's just recognizing and pointing out clearly the different bases for analysis. So I'm sure there's a, add 30% and figure it out, right? Multiply by 1.30 and you'll figure out what their gross is. It's probably less than that, but it's a rough calculation you could do. But I think my general point is still good for any numbers of people who are very modestly incomed. I'm all for pursuing policy that helps those who essentially aren't in a position to help themselves because their incomes are so low. But then there's people that will be hurt by this, by losing the universal standard. And that's where I kind of start to question the whole, what we're doing, okay? Thank you.
Okay, everyone here has spoken except me on the subject. I will speak, but first I want to make a couple comments as chair, a couple procedural comments, and maybe a little synopsis of where we are and what the options are for the committee. So, the recommendation as is from staff is very clear. We know it's option C in the chart, right, which is doing two things. It is removing all age-based discounts, not only the seniors one, but the youth one as well, in that category. And it is doing it would be only income-based discounts, which is the after-tax plus 15%. Right, so two things at once. Councillor McLaren mentioned that those two different things don't need to go together. Councillor Chappelle mentioned that this is all, that there's a lot of arbitrary things happening here that are costing us money, and that perhaps we should be looking at trying one thing at a time, so somewhat similar to Councillor McLaren. Councillor Hall and Councillor Kiley both like option C, and if it passes committee and we recommend that council, we know already we've got a split vote at council. So, and Councillor Hutchison also does not like option C. So before I cast my vote, I'm looking at, basically I have to break the tie here at committee, and then we'll be voting at council, which will also be a split vote. And no matter how we explain it, it will be framed as removing the universal seniors discount. That's the way it's going to get framed. There's no putting the cat back into the hat. So our options, back to the procedural piece, are we approve this or we amend to have a different option. Recommending in the negative is not a good idea in this case, because that really just makes this committee's input very minimal and it becomes a council discussion. But if we want this deliberation that we had today to be incorporated in council's thinking and to influence council, we need to recommend something. So that's what Councillor Hall and Kiley are saying, C is great for the reasons that they stated. McLaren and Chappelle are saying no. C is not great, and that we need to retain the seniors discount at the very least. And so what we don't know is how to agree. So if I were to agree with maintaining some kind of seniors discount, I would need an amendment how we would do that, and how much would it cost, and so on, and what's that going to look like? Because that's not what the report is recommending. That's doable, though. It's doable, but it may not be doable in a short time tonight, because we probably have to take a recess, and we probably need to work on what that amendment would look like in a way that staff could act on it certainly before it goes to council. So that makes me think, like, if we are not going to support option C, we almost need to defer this to work on what option we do want to support. Do we need more discussion here? I think everyone's made themselves clear. But the final vote will be split at council. So, essentially, if I support the recommendation, it could still fail at council. We know we have 3 councillors present here that do not support it.
Order. I mean, this entire report will go to council. Council will get to review all of the options as we have.
Yes. I'm essentially not ready to make my decision. I really need to know what the other councillors are thinking on this. This is not a slam dunk on either side. This committee did not, the deliberations today did not solve anything because we're split. I either need a recess or I need to defer this to talk to my colleagues. Okay, 5-minute recess. Okay, so everyone's taken their seats. And I have a suggestion. This is, so I've spoken to most of you. Well, I've spoken to all the committee members about the conundrum that we're in. What we really need is consensus on one of the options so that we can recommend it to council. And because two aspects are being combined in option C, as Councillor McLaren pointed out, the one is eliminating of the age-based discounts and the other one is using the LIM plus 15, right? Those two things put together make it difficult to achieve consensus, even though it may be a sound recommendation, and it makes me predict that it will have the same kind of head scratching at council at the moment. It's our job as a committee to try to clarify this and hash this out. So I think what we need to do is back up a step, split those two things up, get the numbers for that, get the options for that. So option of keeping the age-based discounts as is, removing it completely, and maybe an intermediate option. And then the other aspect, which is using LICO, using LIM 15, or using another metric. Because we heard from Councillor Hutchison that he wasn't even sure this was the right threshold. So split up the thresholds from the elimination of the age-based discounts, have the two things separated by staff, and come back to us to continue the conversation.
Point of order. I know that's different than that's what's before us on this chart. I feel like all of those options are there.
Well, it's not really important, but this is debated. I haven't made the deferral yet. I'm trying to get it to a point where what we have is the will of the committee that it is going to be close to what council is going to be able to digest. So that's not really, this chart has 7 different options on it, one of which is the status quo, but it doesn't have the intermediate step of separating the age-based discounts first, or perhaps raising the threshold first. It doesn't have those two things because it's got one paying for the other. And that's the one aspect that's coming from staff that actually isn't coming from council. So we may actually differ from staff on that aspect, but we may actually agree on other aspects. So if we separate them, we may actually find that we agree with staff on half of it and not, or works, and not the other one. And by keeping it together, we're forced to try to put it all together and shoehorn it into one option, option C. That's why I'm telling you why. So basically, if I have to vote right now, I'm going to have to vote against option C only because I don't think it's perfect. And I would rather vote in favor of something with the committee that is close after they've separated those two aspects.
I'm not trying to be obtuse here, but option F is continuing age-based with limit after tax. Option G is continuing age-based with limit 15. Isn't that the separation that you're looking for in contrast to B and C, which is just limit after tax and limit 15?
No, the truth is there's actually more than 7 different possibilities and permutations with the 2 different scales, or the 2 different aspects. One aspect is the age-based discounts and the elimination of them, which makes room in our budget supposedly to offer this greater threshold, right? That putting those 2 things together is basically the basis of this recommendation. And I'm suggesting we need to separate the 2 and debate each shortly at this committee and find the combination the right spot, the right combination of what two things together once we've seen what the cost estimates are from staff on the two aspects. These numbers are combined. It's like when it's two different variables and the levers are going in different directions, and they've found one that they are comfortable with, and two of the members here are comfortable with. But I'm skeptical that we will find 7 members of council that are comfortable with it, as it stands. And it's our job as a committee to hammer this out and get an option that will pass council. Yeah. So, do I even have the chair right now? I shouldn't have the chair. So you have the chair, Councillor Chappelle. And the acting CAO has got her hand up.
I recognize you. Acting CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing that I would ask if the committee is going to move in that direction is probably to provide some guidance as far as what options you're looking for. So one that we did not include, we heard tonight, was remove all discounts completely. So I think we should probably include that one. But I think there was mention of limb 15 is not high enough. Well, do you want us to put limb 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, like how far? Because I'm afraid if we come back with them separately, someone's going to say, well, that's not high enough, staff did not follow direction. Well, staff obviously cannot guess what members of the committee might be thinking. So all I'm saying is if you want them separated and a whole bunch of different options brought forward, it would be ideal to get some direction as far as the limits that you're looking for.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you. I know there's no deferral yet, but if there is one bit of information or clarity that I think might be beneficial, would be indicating the amount of true, like, is there a way, I guess this is a question for staff, is there a way to separate true cost versus lost revenue? Like these calculations include both, as Ms. Hitchens has said. I'm just curious if it's foreseeing potential issues that council may have in wrapping their heads around these recommendations. Is there a way to separate those numbers?
Through you, Mr. Whoops. I do have the breakdown of what's age-based costs and income-based costs for all of those options over time, including year 2023, which is in the middle there. I tried to condense it a bit because I thought that was a lot of numbers to put before you and to put in the report, but I'm happy to provide that as well. The totals will remain the same as up there. It'll just show how we got to that total. In terms of what's lost revenue versus what's actual costs, most of the age-based discount numbers are lost revenue because it's the difference between paying the full adult fee and paying the discounted fee, whereas the income-based program is more based on actual costs of programs. So I'm happy to break it out because I've already done it and provide that to council, so I can take this chart and give you this chart instead, which will basically show you the numbers in a little more detail. But to interim CAO's Hurdle's comment, we can do limb 10, we can do limb 65, we can do all of the options, but we could stick to LICO if you wanted us to go there. We just felt as staff that based on our previous work that staying at LICO was not an option we wanted to consider because really we were trying to reach more low-income people through this change. So, eliminating age-based discounts and staying at LICO would save us the most money if it's a fiscal question, but wouldn't serve the population to the degree we wanted to serve. So, I'm happy to cost out as many other options as you want. We thought these 7 gave you a range between reducing age-based and eliminating it or leaving it alone. or changing the threshold really from LICO to limb 18 to limb 15, or really, if you wanted it in column A and column B, those are your options. I just combined them for visual effect, but I can separate them out too. But that may be more confusing than this is, but I'm happy to do it.
I'll return the chair to you and recognize you.
Thank you. So I'm the chair now? Okay.
Just back on the, through you, Mr. Chair, just back on that question of costs. Now, when you're forecasting the cost in 2026 of the lost revenue potential, am I correct to assume you're putting in the annual increase that seems to get passed by council, averaging about 3% per year on parks and things? So that increase is already compounding? Okay, thank you. Well, then I would also like to see the LICO costs rather than just the keep bumping it, because you're going from one up.
I'm just going to give a summary now. So there's multiple things going on that fed into the recommendation, and multiple reactions from various members of the committee. There are those who like the income-based discount only because of the reason stated equitable social analysis reasons, and there's so that's the so you may like the income-based discount, and you may also not be attached to the age-based discount. So then you like option C. If you like one of those things and not the other, you've got a few options there, but they're fairly narrow and not really that palatable if you start looking down at EFG and the costs involved, right? It's like you may need to recuperate costs, but we need the breakdown. For example, lost revenue, that's not a real number. Lost revenue is not a real number because if you take away discount, that person doesn't necessarily take the bus, right? It's not, you don't get that revenue back by taking away the discount. That's an estimate. It's not a real number. Also, that's why it needs to be separated, because some of these are real numbers and some of them are estimates. Some of them are current, actual, measured numbers. Some of them are projections. It's all added up into one number and gives us I guess my problem is having to make a decision that's complex with something that's been simplified without us asking for it to be simplified. That's what the committee is actually for, doing this work. It's now 9 o'clock. I'm no closer to being able to endorse anything to council. I really think we need to defer this for further information from staff. Breakdowns, simple breakdowns of all the numbers, the ones that are real, the ones that are estimates. Let us add them up. Let us combine them ourselves into different recipes that may give us what we want. Let us talk to each other and see if we can find consensus amongst ourselves, right? Before we actually have to vote on this. We could do it by recommending option C, but if that fails at council, we're back to square one. We're gonna have to amend this on the fly at council. And if we don't want option C today, we have to do the same thing. We have to amend it right here and have something that we're ready to present to council that is perfect. I just don't see how we can get there from where we're at right now. So I won't quite move deferral yet, but unless you guys can convince me otherwise, that's what I'm going to do next time I take the microphone. Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. A question for staff around time sensitivity. A few times in the report it referenced this being ready for 2020. I'm wondering how long we have to consider the fee structure before we're past the point of return for 2020 and we bump this a full other 18 months into 2021.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as noted in the report, Whatever decision is made will affect the rates and fees bylaw, which needs to be amended when the 2020 budget's done, as well as promotional materials, et cetera, for transit and recreation. So if a decision was made by council in September, I've been told by my cohorts in transit and recreation, that's enough time to make the change for 2020. But if it's pushed much later than October, then we get into budget season, and then it would probably need to be pushed until 2021 to be reasonable, because we can't make all those changes. Changing the income-based program, can be done fairly late in the year, because that's on a calendar year anyway. It's all of the rates and fees changes relating to the age base that would cause issues if we push it much past September.
Thank you. And second question about timing. How long does a policy need to be implemented to assess its impact? So for example, if we were to find a solution tonight and say we'll go forward with it, and we were able to talk with our colleagues at council, formally and informally, to get them to agree, would we need 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to see the increase in cost, the increase in participation, or obviously conversely decrease both ways? How long do we need to assess a policy?
Through you, we've suggested a 2-year window to monitor it. So whenever those changes are implemented, we could track patterns of utilization over 2 years to tell whether more people are coming through the door, less people are coming through the door, what the impact is. So 2 years of data as a minimum. Obviously, the longer window we have to compare patterns, the better from a statistical point of view, but 2 years would at least let us know that what we're doing is having a positive or a negative impact in the community.
Right, so combining the two questions, when does this need to be passed, ready for 2021 or 2020, and how long we need to assess? If we push it off now, essentially we're saying that we won't make a determination on whether or not this is a good policy within this council term. Because if we wait until 2021 and need two years from there, we're into 2023. So the efficacy of our work will be determined by future councils. And I mean, that's something that happens often. I'm not making a judgment statement on that, but I think we need to recognize that we have the possibility to implement something, gauge its effectiveness, and then tweak it as needed, because likely it needs tweaking within our term, and have that as one of the legacies of our council. And that's something that I'm very interested in. And I think that we should consider that as we make the decision about whether or not to keep pushing this off.
Mr. Spell.
Call the question.
Councillor Spell has called the question. It's a vote to see if we call the question. You need 2/3 for the question to be called. Is that right?
Yes, but if it's whatever decision's made,
yeah,
it goes to council.
This is a procedural point. We call on the question. We need to vote on whether to call the question, yes or no. All debate would be curtailed and we would vote. We need 2/3 to call the question. Please vote. Okay, so we're voting on the recommendation, keeping in mind that if it fails, we need to stay and work on an amendment. No?
That's the problem. The question is, if I know is voted now, it goes to council. There's no need to be amended for that. So you can ask Mr. Bell for this and that, because now we're combined. It's a yes or no situation. Whatever the decision is, it goes to council.
Okay.
I don't think necessarily
Sorry, he just explained, I explain, we're gonna have to re-vote on the calling the question. He just explained procedurally what this means. So if we vote now, and we vote on the question, and we vote in the negative, it goes to council in the negative. It essentially means we didn't make a recommendation. We recommended not to take the staff's recommendation, and that's it. We're not recommending what to do. If we vote, if we were going to do something different, we would need to amend it before we vote, essentially. We don't have the option to amend after we vote. When I voted to call the question, I thought we could amend it after we voted. Therefore, I will call the question again on whether we call the question. James, maybe you can explain it better.
So just so everyone is on the same page, assuming for a moment that there was not a call of the question to vote, essentially, if the committee votes on this matter without amending it or deferring it, the result of that vote, whether it be in support or against, will be sent to council. If the vote is a negative vote, there is not an opportunity to amend and go in a different direction or defer. So by supporting the calling the question, basically the committee is in a situation where a yes or no vote will be called on the recommendation as presented by staff, and the result of that vote will be provided to council, and there is not an opportunity to amend, defer. It's kind of a binary situation.
All those in favor for calling the question? All those opposed? So what does that mean? 40%, 60%? Don't you need 2/3? It was a 3-2 vote. The clerk is going to check if we need 2/3. The clerk has confirmed that it does need 2/3. Therefore, call the question did not pass. Therefore, the motion is still on the floor. We either need an amendment or a deferral. And we need to have, and 3 people have to support it for it to happen. An amendment or a deferral. A possible amendment is we split the two. We make an amendment where we only vote on the LIM 15 threshold,
Point of
for example.
order, sorry, point of order. The call the question failed does not mean that we need a deferral or an amendment.
No, or we voting on the question. Yes. Can I just finish my sentence? The point is to try to find consensus, which we don't have. We don't have consensus, and I'm not sending a negative vote to council for no reason. If you're trying to bully me into your vote, that's what you're doing. Stop interrupting. We need to separate the two aspects and see if we can get a consensus on one of them. Does anyone have any suggestions which of the two aspects we might have to?
Point of order, I would agree with Mike to the left. We've had recommendations come to council that are negative, and then it's the weird, if you're voting against this, actually vote yes versus vote no. It gets a bit confusing, yes, but I still think it gives us time, even if it is in the negative, to talk with our colleagues, to work with staff to find answers to some of these questions. We can resolve something.
Then we're back to the vote on the question. If nobody wants to amend and no one wants to support my deferral, I am going to vote no. If that's what you want, it's essentially a non-recommendation. All right. Does anyone else wish to speak? Okay, well then we will call the question, Councillor Chappelle. On the recommendation, all those in favor? All those opposed? Recommendation fails.
A recorded vote has been requested by Councillor Chappelle, so we'll begin with Councillor Holland. Yes. Councillor Kiley? Mayor McLaren?
No.
Councillor Stroud?
No.
Councillor Chappelle?
No.
And that loot of 2 to 3.
Okay, so the next item of business is the appointment of the auditor for the 2019 fiscal year.
Call a question?
All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Congratulations, Treasurer. You wrote such a great report. Oh, sorry. All those in favor of the recommendation? That passes unanimously. Yes, it was moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor McLaren. And that's it. Next meeting is, where is it? October 10th. Need a motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Adjourned.